Peninsula School District Board of Directors regular meeting to order. Please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's what I thought. Planning for tomorrow. I know, I think something fell. Excellent. All right, thank you all. This business meeting of the Board of Directors is being held in public in compliance with the Open Public Meeting Act and is being live streamed. With regard to routine matters, board members have reviewed the agenda and have had the opportunity to clarify questions with the superintendent prior to the board meeting. Such matters are often processed without additional comment or debate. We have one change in the agenda tonight. Agenda item 9.6 is being moved to the end of the new business items on the agenda. We will take action on item 9.6 after item 9.9. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda with as amended?
I'll make the motion. Second.
It has been moved by Leslie and seconded by Lori to approve the agenda as amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion has been approved. I now ask Dr. Jarvis to present the superintendent's report to the board.
My superintendent's report is relatively short. Over these last 2 weeks, we took the opportunity to reach as many community groups as possible to share the progress with our capital plans, in particular the renderings. And the question that came up today, in those travels and in those reports, did we hear anybody that was unhappy sort of about anything? And the short answer is no. There's a great excitement throughout the community about the progress, about the renderings, about the new schools. I had the fun at one meeting of asking a couple of the children there which schools they attended, and a couple of the Artendale students immediately owned the new Artendale that will be theirs. But the short version is just to report that it was what a delight. I guess I've been around long enough to have been on the circuit many times with levy reports and requests for regular levies or capital levies or bond issues. And this one had nothing other than report back to a community that I think has been a long time since they've seen new schools emerging in good order and good time and the benefit to the kids. So I'm just going to literally limit so much of my 2 weeks was dedicated to can we get that word out and share where we are. The pictures on the wall, some of the technical work continues to evolve hour by hour, minute by minute, and there are certainly changes taking place. But in terms of the basic layout of classrooms, the design of the buildings on the land site, in 2 of our schools approaching the end even of the SEPA hearings and any feedback from the community, it has been a delight to really go back to our Peninsula community and say, here's the work that the people have done, and to feel the pride and the smiles and the happiness. And I think I'll just limit my superintendent report to that. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you very much, Dr. Jarvis. We will now hear from our student reps. Tonight, Ashley from Henderson Bay High School is unable to be with us tonight, as well as Lena Jansen from Peninsula High School, but we thank Hope Flanagan for joining us yet for a third meeting. Thank you very much. And Kira from Gig Harbor High School. And so I will ask Kira if you'd like to start with your student report to the board. That would be great.
Okay. As a student representative, it is my job to update the board. So I would like to share a story of my personal experience. Last year, I took my 4th year of Spanish in the school district. It was a small class, but one that opened my eyes to inequity. I met a student named Jose who had just moved here from Guatemala. Jose didn't speak any English and was enrolled in EL classes for half the day. However, all of his materials were in English, a language he was still learning. After a few weeks of knowing him, I learned that he was failing nearly all of his classes. I brought my concerns to the administration, but was told that his EL classes would be enough, and that the main concern for Jose was teaching him English rather than helping him graduate. Instead of giving up, I spoke to a teacher at my high school, Mrs. Gaiman. She informed me of the current situation for EL students in the district. The EL teacher is only in our school part-time and has to divide herself between the two high schools. The EL students are being taken out of the traditional classroom setting and away from their English-speaking peers to be placed in EL classes without the effective co-teaching model. Additionally, I found that many EL students are failing more than one class. Taking EL students out of the normal classes and placing them in an EL class is not helping them as effectively as intended, because their struggle goes beyond merely learning the language. EL students must understand the content of their classrooms and become proficient at completing work and passing tests if they are to graduate. This means that currently the policy for educating EL students focuses more on the short-term remedies rather than long-term impacts. As a student, I have a unique perspective in seeing the inequities occurring in my school, though this problem far surpasses my own experiences. According to the U.S. Department of Education, EL students' graduation rate is 13% below the national average. This difference in graduation rates is especially concerning because those without a high school diploma experience lower earnings and higher unemployment than those with a diploma. EL students are falling behind. In order to help EL students, the Peninsula School District ought to evaluate the policies in place for them and make changes to promote equity. If administrators, teachers, and counselors are not trained in equity, they cannot effectively work together to help the EL students. I'm deeply concerned that education for all does not really mean all in the Peninsula School District. Jose and other students like him may not be able to stand up and voice inequity happening to them daily, but I can, and I say enough is enough. Jose matters. All EL students matter. As a student, I want to bring the clear inequity occurring in my classrooms to the attention of the Peninsula School Board. I invite you to spend time with EL students in this district, and I want you to see what they go through in a day. I believe then you will join me in prioritizing equity for all. Thank you.
Thanks, Kara. Excellent. Hope, Peninsula High School.
Yes. So today with me, I have some notes prepared from Lena about some different things happening in Peninsula and just an overall update on kind of our school and where we're at the beginning of the year. So our sports teams have been fundraising. The band just finished a mattress fundraiser, and our cheer team hosted a mini cheer camp, which helps fund for different sports events that they need new equipment, which is very important. Sports teams this year have 410 participants in the fall season, which is a really amazing thing to have a lot of students coming out and being involved in our school community. We have 103 students in band, and our marching band has been performing at competitions, and they have done incredible during home football games and across the board. We have 154 students in choir this year, 120 students in drama who are currently working on the winter production of A Christmas Carol. Our homecoming was about 3 weeks ago, and it was a huge success. We had over 1,000 students in attendance, which is a very high attendance rate as compared to years previous. And then also our open house was a huge success under the direction of Dr. Potts. The fishbowl football game is tomorrow, as I'm sure you know, and then that means that we are currently in Food Bowl Week, which is an annual food drive competition between Gig Harbor and Peninsula. And the food raised goes towards food backpacks for kids, which benefits all the kids in our community. And so a little update, current standings, PHS is at 3,469 items, with Gig Harbor at 1,481 items. And they're announcing the winner tomorrow at the game. And then we are also in planning mode for a Veterans Day Assembly, and we will be holding another Miracle Minute for Honor Flight. And Honor Flight is a really cool organization that we partner with during the month of November. And we raise money, and the money is used to send veterans to Washington, D.C. to visit the memorials for the wars that they've served in. We've already raised $500 at our last football game, and we are hoping to double that. Some concerns regarding atmospheres and different areas at PHS. As our school population increases, there's a need for more teachers. However, there will not be enough classrooms to fulfill the teacher-to-student ratio as the classes begin to increase. Already we have multiple teachers traveling from classroom to classroom for different periods. A personal example, I have chemistry class in a non-lab classroom, and it really limits the amount of activities that we can do. And when we do need to do labs, it's very time-consuming to have to switch classrooms, and it disrupts the other learning environments for students in the other classrooms. And another example of our large student population problems, for our first and second assemblies, we've had to bring in supplemental bleachers for the students because we merely cannot fit them all in our gym anymore. And that is due to the largest freshman incoming class that we've had at Peninsula yet. And so going with the increase in students at our school, as class sizes get bigger, there's also an ongoing parking issue at Peninsula. Overflow, as we call dirt lot, has officially been closed for the winter and fall seasons, and this only adds to the problems at Peninsula regarding parking. So, thank you.
Thank you, Student Voices. We appreciate you bringing all of those things forward to us. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to comments from the community. Members of the audience wishing to speak to the board are asked to identify themselves for the record before sharing their comments. We ask that comments not be personally directed, abusive, or obscene. In the interest of fairness, there is a 3-minute time limit per speaker. Please note that this is an opportunity to speak to the board, and that the board will listen but not engage in dialogue or a response. I thank you for respecting these guidelines, and at this time I do ask Daniel Johnson. Podium. Thank you. Yes, please, right here.
Good evening. I'm Daniel Johnson with our Oak Center. We're a group of community citizens who came together to address the situation of homeless students in the greater Peninsula area. When we tell folks that we've identified, community leaders identified nearly 150 high school students who experienced homelessness last year, people are often stunned to hear that. And so, and when you add the middle school students, that number is over 200. And so we came together, a group of community citizens came together over about a 3-year period, put a discussion together about what would it look like to intervene in their lives and to make a difference. And so we had a home that was donated across the Purdy Spit, beautiful home. We put 2 resident advisors in there. We put 6 beds in there. We have, those beds are dedicated right now to male students, just because when we got the home donated, more male students were in the queue. And then we got several host homes throughout the community. Now we have 5 or 6 host homes. And so we're able to take a student who is sometimes, couch surfing, or maybe in a family situation where it's just not functional, and put them in a living environment where they have not only food and clothing and support, but also a mentor. And we're able to do this in about a 48-hour period because we have a certified social worker who does an intake, all kinds of professional people on this committee who work with them. Then we also do mentoring and parenting. Really, you could view it as mentoring for students and mentoring for parents. And we feel that everybody really needs a mentor in their life, truth be told. And so for the, 9,000 students in this school district, we decided that we wanted to make a mentor available for everyone. We're not 100% sure how we're going to pull that off, but about a month ago we had a card that went out through the school district, started to be distributed, and then Monday night we had our first parenting class in partnership with the YMCA, the Peninsula School District, Harbor Christian Center, and us. And so the goal is that there's just a class always running at the Y or some local facility where people can jump in. And instead of just, driving the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff where the homeless situation presents itself in the green belt behind our house or in the woods, you see a tent or whatever, before it gets to that, we are working with the school district and with the counselors to say, hey, help us identify where the wheels get wobbly here, and we'll get a mentor in place. And we also do transportation for students. We take them to and from doctor's appointments, school appointments, et cetera. It's all volunteer. It's all on the volunteer's dime, which is an amazing program, and that's happening more and more. And we also do food and clothing, and big shout out to the Kiwanis Club, who has a program called Kiwanis Cares. And they take a student out and they buy them brand new school clothes when they identify a problem in the family. So there's just a great continuum of care that we've put together in the community. We wanted everybody to know about it, and we want everybody to be part of it. So, thank you, appreciate it. Cool.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Any other comments from the community? Okay, we'll now move on to district reports. I ask Elena Brown to report the Finance and Audit Advisory Committee. Thanks, Elena.
It's a pleasure to be here this evening to give you some highlights about the Audit and Finance Advisory Committee's work on the upcoming levy proposal. My report this evening is in your packet, a full text of the report, but I'll share some highlights this evening. The report encompasses the work we did at 4 meetings throughout the month of September and October. The list of attendees is in your report, but it included members of our committee, thank you, district administrators, and school board members. Our discussions at these 4 meetings focused on 4 broad topics relating to the levy. We talked about general levy information. We talked about assumptions for the levy calculation. We spent some time discussing levy spending, and then we talked about the technology levy. So again, the written report has details of our conversations and all the things that we covered. I'm just going to share just a few highlights. On the topic of the general levy questions, new state laws and regulations have considerably changed how school districts calculate their levies and what they can do with them. So we spent time in our meetings trying to understand what the state means by fully funding education, what the new levy calculations look like, why, even though the state says we are fully funded, there are still shortfalls. So those were topics at our meetings. We also talked about the name of a levy. The state has an influence on what we call a levy. By state law, previous levies were to be called maintenance and operations levies, which did not mean maintenance of facilities. It meant maintenance of programs, which is always what they've been. Now the new state law says that the same levies, which were maintenance and operations, should now be called enrichment levies. So we discussed the need for our levy to have a name that fairly and accurately represents the purpose of the funds, complies with state guidelines, and eliminates voter confusion. We also talked about the new way the levies are calculated. Taxpayers approve a fixed dollar amount for a levy. They don't approve a rate. It's a fixed dollar amount per year that the district can levy. And the district is limited in how much it can levy by 2 factors. It's the lower of a per student rate, or $2.50 of $1,000 of assessed value. It's the lower of those 2. So because of the high assessed values in our area, we will likely never be able to collect or levy $2.50. Our levy will be limited to the state set student rate. Knowing that, I'll move on to the next topic, which was assumptions for the levy. So the most important assumption for the upcoming levy is what is going to happen to student enrollment, because that's how you calculate it. You take the number of students, multiply it by the rate given to us by the state, and that's how much we can levy. So we spent some time as a committee talking about enrollment and agreeing upon what we thought were reasonable estimates over the next couple of years. We also spent some time talking about inflation, and that was important because the costs of the district are going to increase due to inflation, and we wanted to make sure that the amount we were planning to levy was sufficient to cover our expenses. And the third assumption we worked on as a committee was looking at assessed values in our region. It's important to note that these assessed values have no impact on what the district can levy, but it does give us an idea of the impact of the levy dollars on the taxpayer and how much that costs them per $1,000 of assessed value. just some important takeaways from our conversations about assumptions. Because the voters will be levied a dollar amount based on student enrollment, our committee felt that building an enrollment buffer into the projected student enrollment was prudent. A buffer amount of students, a number of students, gives the taxpayers the opportunity to approve a higher levy amount based on higher enrollment number estimates. If the higher enrollment numbers don't materialize, the district will be held to the maximum allowed pupil amount for the actual number of students we have, not what we thought they were going to be. If the numbers do materialize, however, the district has access to funds to provide enrichment services for the larger number of students. So again, putting in a little bit of a buffer in the enrollment numbers for calculating the levy just gives us the room if we need extra resources to provide for a higher number of students. Taxpayers will never be charged more than the maximum dollar amount per student for the actual students we have, regardless of what the estimates are. Another thing I wanted to make a note of is that as a committee, we did not put a high priority on meeting any specific tax rate. We really prioritized getting the funds we needed to provide quality education for students and staff. So that takes me to the area of levy spending. I think Karen's going to give you some more information on details of levy spending, and it's all in my report. I don't want to repeat any of that. It was not the role of our committee to propose or dictate levy spending, but we did want to understand it, again, to make sure that levy calculations provided the necessary funds. We did go through every category in quite a bit of detail. We asked a lot of questions, saw a lot of numbers. The important takeaway from those discussions is that we know that a levy spending plan is not a shopping list. We're not going to make a list and we want to do this, A, B, C, D, and E, and this is what's going to be paid for in the levy. But we also discussed the value of formulating levy spending in the context of a broader strategic plan for the district. That there was significant value in considering both when coming up with a spending plan. Finally, we spent some time talking about a technology levy. Several districts in Pierce County have run successful technology levies, and the state allows districts to create small capital levies that provide funds for technology projects. These can be short-term or anywhere up to 6 years. There's some consideration in our district of running a technology levy at the same time that we run the next replacement levy. And we talked about that. We talked about the pros and cons of we talked about the value of a technology levy, what we could do with the technology levy, and we also talked about whether it was a good idea to run it at the same time as the next levy that we're planning to run in February. So in arguments for running a technology levy in February include that the district does have several significant technology needs that are fairly immediate and that state funds don't cover. And there's not room to cover them in the regular replacement levy. So we do need the money. So that's one argument for. A small tech levy that runs over 6 years gives the district a steady stream of funds that are dedicated strictly to providing these tech needs. For example, a tech levy of about 25 cents per $1,000 of assessed value could provide about $5 million a year over a six-year period of time, which is $30 million, which is, we could do a lot with that money. There's also a potential at the moment to piggyback with a community partner on a fiber project, and it's important to not let that opportunity slip away. And it's also cheaper to run 2 ballot initiatives at the same time than it is to run the two separately. When we considered that, we also looked at arguments against it. There's a lot of risk. There's risk that the voters will approve the smaller amount and not the replacement levy, and the replacement levy is critical. We don't want to confuse the voters, and We also, there's not a clear plan right now. There's a general idea of what the tech needs are, but at the moment, when we would run that, there isn't a clear strategic plan in place that could help educate the voters on why that money was necessary. So as we talked about it as a committee, we are strongly in favor of the district running a tech levy to give the district the opportunity to improve technology for our students and our staff, and to open up other revenue for other exciting opportunities that we're waiting to take advantage of. But we do feel like the board should take careful consideration of the timing of when that happens. Just some final thoughts. This report from our committee is intended to be a representation of the work we did relating to the upcoming levy. We hope our work will assist you as you discuss the enrichment and tech levies, and will serve as a guide as you chart a course for our district. Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Could you just review the commitment of the community in attending those meetings and helping with the decision-making? And you don't have to list people's names, but it was a significant number of people that had input, correct?
Yes, our community has, let me look here. Our committee, did I say community? Our committee has 7 members, and a quorum of those were present at all 4 meetings. So it's significant time was spent getting their input on these and their thoughts on these ideas.
I would bring it up during the other discussion coming up anyway, so I'll just ask, as far as the name of the levy, I know years ago it was maintenance operation, everyone referred to it as M&O, and then it switched to EP&O, and now there's some talk about it being an educational programs operations and enrichment levy, which is a lot to roll off the tongue. Although it's an enrichment levy, as far as OSPI and the state's concerned, the community's not really going to know the difference between an enrichment levy and M&O levy or an EP&O levy. So is there really that much of a difference of leaving it the education program or EP&O, which the community's sort of familiar with now, instead of changing it up again to add the enrichment to it? I mean, did you all discuss that?
We did discuss that. Our feeling about the name of the levy, I think the last levy that the community approved was called a Continuing Educational Programs and Operations, M&O, in parentheses, levy. And our community thought that the Continuing Educational Program and Operations levy is still a good name. We like that. It's what they approved the last time. It's what they're familiar with. That's the EP, and that's the acronym EP&O, Educational Programs and Operations. We did feel pretty strongly about putting the replacement in there, because that's what it is. So Educational Programs and Operations levy. There is some question about whether a ballot initiative will be approved without the word enrichment in it, because that is a state requirement. So I think Karen can speak more to that, but that's the only consideration that we discussed in the meeting about putting the word enrichment, is that it's required. We have to.
Okay.
Any other questions? Elena, thank you. I was at all of those meetings, and I did see all of the work that was put into it. I know the board greatly appreciates the input, and we will be using that as we have discussions tonight and ultimately make a decision on how to proceed. So thank you very much to you and your committee for
Thanks for having me.
providing. Thank you. Okay, I now move on to John Hellick and Dan Gregory, as they will present the Assistant Superintendent reports to the board. Thank you both. And you don't have a microphone, but if you could grab that one, that'd be great.
Sure.
Well, thank you to the board again for providing this opportunity for us to update you on some things here that are going on either side of the district. And I do want to just take a moment to thank Kira and Hope for your input today. it is very important for us to hear, other than from our teachers and administrators, from our students about what's going on in your schools and what's going well as where we can do things better and improve. So here's the quick update from the Peninsula feeder side of what's going on. Put my glasses off so I can read here. At Vaughn Elementary School, they will soon begin the Tutors with Tales programs. This is the reading program that is done in conjunction with Communities in Schools and Tutors with Tales dog therapy team. The program is provided by Communities in Schools. Kirsten Roberts, their site coordinator, as well as Patty Wilson, their library tech and CIS mentor coordinator, are very much involved in that and are working to coordinate that. So that's kind of a fun one that was started several years ago. Dancing Classrooms is another program that was started several years ago, and this is Vaughn's 4th year doing Dancing Classrooms. They started that program again on October 15th. We are the beneficiaries of support coming from Gig Harbor Rotary on that, as well as Cam Briggs from Dancing Classrooms. That's Betty Felker at the Rotary that really generated the energy around that several years ago when we first started. Vaughn 5th graders are provided that fabulous experience, which helps shape a successful 5th grade year, and that's why they do it early in the year. They also have Living History Day planned, and that's at the Key Peninsula Civic Center. 4th graders take that walking trip down to the Key Peninsula Center and connect with Washington State history. It connects students directly to the history of the Key Peninsula. It's coordinated by 4th grade teachers Elise Michaels, Beth Stitt, and Catherine Moore, as well as Judy Mills, docent at the Living History Museum and the Key Peninsula Civic Center. So that's some exciting things going on at Vaughn Elementary. As we head farther down the Key to Evergreen Elementary, Amy Barber is the new STEAM integration specialist there. Amy is developing an engineering lab for a recess alternative. So as opposed to going out and playing on the playground or indoor recess if it's raining, she is developing an option for students to be involved in an engineering lab. She's acquired the funds through their PTA and different grants and really plans to have that up and running very soon. So that's kind of a fun and exciting opportunity for students. Evergreen also has their Eagle Readers program, and they've revamped that this year so that we will more deeply engage both students and the mentors from the community. And when I asked Mr. Maxwell who those mentors are, he says, it's mostly retired folks, but then there's some younger folks in their 40s. And I said, yes, Hugh, I can now say that those are younger folks in their 40s, so we appreciated that. Last week, the mentors from the community were able to come to school and go to the book fair with their mentees, and they worked collaboratively to check or to purchase books for them so that they could read those together. The kids were very excited about that. Also at the elementary level, we have several of our schools, the administrators and one of the school psychologists had gone together and they wrote a grant for socio-emotional learning. Hugh Maxwell at Evergreen, Carrie Alshire, who is the Purdy Elementary School psych, Christy Brooks at Purdy, and David Brooks at number 9. We don't have a name yet, we'll just call him number 9. They received a grant of $15,000 to support educational learning focused on social emotional through professional growth planning for this year. Grants will be offered to 20 certificated elementary staff who are interested in growing in the area of social emotional learning, and the team is very excited about the opportunity to provide support and enhance learning skills for educators in social emotional learning. Moving up to the middle schools at KPMS, they were excited to have had 97 students turn out for fall sports. 49 of those are in cross country, and as I think you know, I think this is our 3rd year of having cross country. So that's pretty exciting that that program continues to grow. Staff are finding ways to introduce new technology apps and practices in class. That includes their success coach, John Selfors, who is sharing information about KPMS on social media. He's kind of become their Twitter go-to guru guy. They are also practicing 4 at the door. And 4 at the door is where teachers meet their students at the door, eyes, hands, voice, hello, and greet them by name. So that's just a way of making connections with students at the door as they come into every classroom. In their flex period also, teachers are all doing periodic lessons from Second Step. Second step is our district-adopted social-emotional learning curriculum that we use at both the elementary and the high school. Traditionally, that's been done periodically by counselors at both the elementary and middle level, but the teachers at KPMS are taking that on this year, and they are building it into that flex period time. And finally, they wanted me to know and you to know that the kitten that was found stuck under the portables at the start of school was adopted by a teacher. So that was important to include. Finally, at PHS, Hope took part of my food bowl update, so I'll let her have that part. Interact Club is back in action at PHS. They had approximately 30 students in attendance at the first meeting, so that's exciting. Unified Sports is coming to PHS. And I had to ask John Yellowlees for a little help on this one. I had heard about it, but I wanted to be more clear on it. Unified Sports is essentially an intramural league at PHS where students with intellectual disabilities will partner and team with students who do not have intellectual disabilities. And so it'll be a fun intramural league where we have some of our students with IEPs partnering with our students without IEPs to have a little recreation and some sporting activity. Basketball is planned for the winter and soccer for the spring, and so that is just a really cool thing and a really cool idea that they have going. So that's pretty awesome. Really happy to see them do that. And finally, I was down to visit with Dr. Potts early in October, and he provided me with something that he took off of the wall as he was coming back from the buses one day. So on October 3rd, Principal Potts was returning from seeing the buses off in the afternoon, and he saw kind of a purplish pink 3x5 card taped to the wall in the Commons. Now remember, they just painted the walls in the Commons, pulled out all the staples, and decided that we're not going to use tape. So what do you think his first thought was? Oh man, we just did all this work and they used the wrong tape and it's going to pull the paint off the wall. So he pulled it off the wall and put it in his pocket and went and visited one of the clubs. And when he got back into his office, he took it out of his pocket and read it and then said, wow. Here I was with kind of a little negative attitude after the first 4 days with somebody putting something on the wall. And then I sit down and read how great our kids are. And I'm going to hand this to you so that you can all see the copy of what was written on there, and then I'll read that out loud for our audience to hear.
I want to hear you read that out loud without getting choked up.
Without getting choked up? Thanks, David, for the challenge on that. I was just kind of preparing myself to do that.
I would get choked up. That's okay.
I'll wait till that gets around. So as you look at that card, here's what was written on the back. Hello, if you've come across this card, the original creator wants you to know that you matter and belong here. If you're having a tough time, there is someone out there who cares. Never give up, be kind, and be your own kind of beautiful, even if people judge you. Make this a great year and work hard. And the little heart symbol, Anon, which is for anonymous. So Joe wanted to share that with me, and I wanted to finish this report by sharing that with you. I thought that was a really nice way to close out the report from the Peninsula side. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to echo Dan's thank you to our student board members for their very thoughtful comments to start. A few of the principals sent me a few pictures, so Brooke has that up, and we're going to start with Discovery. And it's always good to see kids. So here we have kinder sculpture is what they're working on here. And another, they're really trying to see how they can focus more on arts and integrate the arts at Discovery this year. So if you go to the next slide, we'll see another example. This is from student work that they learned from rotational symmetry and outdoor arts and science programs taught by Laurel Kingsbury. And they also wanted to note that, as many of our schools did, our students are proudly wearing their pendants around from the hands-on art project that just wrapped up. On the learning side of Discovery, they've really been working through their professional learning communities on the multi-tiered systems of support and drilling down on those gaps of discrete skills, especially in the early grades, and really thinking outside of the box about the interventions that they're doing. And that's something Delano really wanted me to point out. And that their pickup and drop-off is still going smoothly. You still see the stanchions up there, but people are turning right when they leave Discovery, and the traffic flow has been much better. As we move on to Voyager, they have a water filling station that's been installed, and they've saved already 150 plastic water bottles. And Kopachuk is going to be coming on board with that also. They're wrapping up their math fact frenzy, 4 weeks of 60 minutes a week minimum math facts. And they're at the end of week 3, and they've logged 61,000 minutes of math. And that's only if they did the minimum, and they know many of their students have gone well beyond that. And I could just report out from being with their collaboration on Wednesday. I saw them, and this has really been a great pattern. You know, we're only a couple of months into our big focus on MTSS, and with a kind of even more direct focus on socio-emotional learning, and seeing how all of their teachers are really sharing what the supports they are that they're doing, comparing across grade levels, within their grade levels, and really trying to say, what can we add? What additional pieces can we add that are going to help our kids? That's going to be not just a couple months. It's going to be a full year and even beyond that. But the progress we're seeing already is really encouraging, and I also saw the teachers writing positive postcards to their students. For Artendale, shout out to many who are kind of helping out with shared leadership there. Mr. Brooks has been out there a lot, helping as Jessica Rosendahl is home with baby Emily and will be through winter break. Also wanted to shout out to Mr. Heastan, the Dean of Students, Ryan Heastan, and Mimi Matthews, their counselor, for helping pick up that slack as well. They wanted to note just how excited the parents have been in the community about their new renderings. So that's been very exciting as well. And they wanted to note that conference week went very well. Some teachers began piloting some student-led conferences and reported success there. And a shout out to lab teacher Amanda Hill for getting their Readbox free book loaner station rolled out. For Pioneer, you heard last time from Stephanie and some of the things that were upcoming and saw her timeline. They've been able to now post for their core team, those positions that's closed this week. They had a strong applicant pool, and we'll be doing interviews for those positions very shortly. And Stephanie wanted to make sure we thank the district and PEA for their support of this process. She had her first community kickoff meeting today at Harbor General Store and had about 25 parents drop in, which is, you know, it's one of those things where you don't know if anyone's going to show up, and you hope they do. And she was just really blown away by the number of people that came in, asked questions, and it was a mix from our community. It was parents of current students in our schools. It was parents at homeschool and parents from private schools, and had a lot of great questions about both the instructional design and also a lot of the logistics. A lot of those, we just have to keep saying be patient. We'll be communicating those, but they were great questions, and we'll get a lot of community input for that. Little update from the annex. Stephanie and Delana have been working together to try and help with the recess. The recess isn't great because they don't have the same play areas as Discovery and our other schools have, but they're being creative. They are going to be working on having some students go over to Discovery for some of that time, and also some parents are chipping in and volunteering to do some art projects as an option also at the school. And they're working on with students and parents on school spirit wear, something along the lines of Discovery Crew, the first pioneers. So again, trying to make this a good special experience for the 5th graders who are there right now. Moving to middle school, we have some more slides, Brooke. We'll pop those up. Principal Roebuck wanted to really emphasize that the big focus on culture and staff and student and staff pride. So a lot of work on really working on that SEL work with the kids, including especially a focus on bullying and anti-bullying campaigns. So you see the poster there. And part of that just goes along with making it a place that kids want to come and where they want to be. And a lot of that is what does our environment look like? So you have the library there that's pictured on the right. And then go ahead and go to the next one. A lot of frames and showcasing the sports in the hallway there. Then you've got updating the library with new seating, counseling office there with new seating, and replacing some things in the gym as well. So just trying to take that pride in the school and make sure that kids, it's a place that they want to be and take pride in. So on to Kopachuk. Today, their ASB leaders hosted a Mix-It-Up Day where students were encouraged to sit at different tables during lunch. And what really made it successful was that staff members were also there sitting with the students and taking part in that and participating. And they thought that was a great success, trying to keep kids from getting too cliquey and mixing up with each other. In addition, they wanted to note that the student leaders are warming it up with Socktober, a drive for scarves, socks, hats, and gloves. And that they gave out 100 pride cars to 100 students just in the first month of school. And finally, with Gig Harbor High School, they did want me to mention the food bowl, but didn't probably notice that they were a little behind, so they have to get it in gear there. They also have a unified sports, and that's been a program already in place at Gig Harbor High School, so it's good to see both schools now doing that. And National Merit Scholarships. The 1.5 million juniors take the PSAT exam from 2018, and only 16,000 are considered to be in that merit scholarship. So it's the, hang on a sec, the semifinalist group, thank you. And two from Gig Harbor High School, Galen Steele and Ian Denton. And Ian logged a near perfect score, and Galen did post a perfect score. So amazing. And I think that is it.
Questions?
Thank you.
Great updates on the schools. It's fun to hear all of them together, so thank you very much. And I'm curious about that engineering lab out at Ballin and what they're doing out there. Maybe they can help with the annex. They need recess stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway.
That's a good point. We will
That's
ask
worth
Amy
exploring.
Barber to see if she can share that with the.
Might lead into something good at a STEAM school. I don't know. Excellent. Thank you guys very much. That was great.
You did it. I couldn't have done it. You did great. I couldn't have done it.
Okay, we will move on to our Department of Learning and Innovation. Melissa Weisner, Chris Hagel, Natalie Boyle, and James Cottonwine, please give us all your wonderful information coming out of Department of Learning and Innovation. We look forward to it.
Thank you again for having us here and sharing the information about our large department with you. We have some exciting things to share, and we also have, besides Chris and myself, you've had James Cantonwine here as our Director of Research and Assessment, and our other director is Natalie Boyle, and she's the Director of Innovative Learning. We all have titles that are very similar. We have to move them around not to confuse ourselves.
So the first thing we want to share with you today is Panoramic Education. It is a new survey that we are starting this week, actually. The window opened this week, so we're starting to see some students taking that now. And this is really to measure some of the things that we talk about in the Peninsula Promise, some of the 21st century skills. And so the Panorama Survey is built into two separate 10-minute surveys, 10 to 15-minute surveys for each student. And so there's a climate survey, which talks about some of the things you'll see up there: school climate, relationships, sense of belonging, and school safety. And then a separate survey on students and how they rate themselves on things like growth mindset, self-awareness, or self-management, social awareness, self-efficacy. So we're really excited. We've been wanting to do this for a really long time in the district here, and we think this is really going to be beneficial. Our principals really are excited to move forward with this too. It really works with the MTSS work we're doing and some of the social emotional things we're working on this year. And so we hope that at our next big quarterly report for the board, we'll have those results back. It measures a lot of the kind of things that we saw in this Healthy Youth Survey every 2 years, but we're doing this, we hope to do this every year now, so that, and do it early and later in the year, so we can see if some of the changes we're making actually improves things for students. So as far as Panorama, that's happening now.
Thanks. So a team of 5 visited some San Diego schools, considered to be innovative schools, in our partnership with Kati Marton from Altitude learning. Katie Marton is a well-published author in the education world, and she talks about spark curiosity, ignite passion, and unleash creativity. So really interested in partnering with her with Pioneer, but really for all of our schools. What we've come to realize over the past few weeks of this work is the work that we do around Pioneer and supporting them really has an impact on every single system in the district. And that's our intent too. So we're being very intentional about, yes, this is for Pioneer, or this would work at Pioneer, but hey, wouldn't this work at Purdy, or this could work at any school? So being very mindful about that work. And on that team, it's our core team that helps support Stephanie, and that's myself and Chris, Natalie, and John Helwick. So we've been engaged in weekly meetings with Stephanie, and just our own learning, because we haven't opened a school like this here, and there aren't a lot of schools in our area. So we like to think that we really truly are the pioneers, and we're very glad to do that. So we visit some schools in San Diego and really focus, thank you, on learner-centered and education. So I have one slide, and it was very hard, but really pictures tell 1,000 words. So what you're seeing, pictures of students from the 4 different schools we visited. One of the main themes in all of the schools and the learning that we're doing is around this idea of agency. And what does agency mean? So it means that there's voice, choice, and ownership on the student part and on the educators, on the teachers and the administrative part, right, at the district office. We get voice and choice when students can tell us what their passions are, and they have an opportunity to pursue those. So if you could see some of the things on there, it's, and we saw this in many, many classrooms. They want to know more about what is climate change doing, or they want to know about animal shelters, or they want to know about how do I learn to code video games. So it really is whatever they're really interested in. And we know that not just children, but ourselves are more engaged when we have a compelling interest in something. So how do we take their interest and their passions, and how do we turn that into engaged learning that the teacher and the district is facilitating? One of the pictures I put in there, because we really do want this school, and we know we have the portables or will for it, it's called the Dream School. And it is, I have to turn around and look. I could have written, oh, it is design, research, engineering, art, math, and science. And what they did is they had a piece of land that they were storing all their old portables on, so they turned it into farmland, and this was in the Encinitas district. And this is actually the first organic school district in America. And they take what they grow, and they have it for their school lunches. And it was a learning garden for sure. They, lots of students were there visiting. They just painted their portables. They put some nice big sliding barn doors, and they were looking at all kinds of science and engineering projects. The one we were really interested in, or I was anyway, was the kitchen and the culinary arts. And one of the things that we heard on the trip was students are very, very interested in cooking and getting their hands on that. Yes. And if you have children or grandchildren, you know this is true. Another piece that struck me as something I had never heard before is because our students are so engaged in the digital age, in the digital world, that they crave the novelty of the analog world. So they want to plant, and they want to cook, and they want to sew, and they want to create, because the digital world doesn't give you that hands-on. So thinking about how we take that information and create experiences that children are going to really, truly be engaged in. And it's not just the engagement. The engaged student is going to persist and have grit. And if they fail, they're going to get up and try it again, and they're going to learn. All around, of course, as we look at what are our standards and what are we doing to support student learning. So the 4 schools we went to: High Tech Elementary, which is in Point Loma. It's a K-5 school, about 400 students. We also visited Flora Vista, which is a K-6 school, and that's in Encinitas, with about 450 students. We visited the Casita Center for Technology in Science and Math, and that's a K-5. That's in Vista, about 588 students. And that was in one day. And then the second day, we spent all day at Design 39, and that is a K-8 school in Poway. And I couldn't find exactly how many students, but
It's about 1,100. but it's K-8.
K-8. Yes, yes. And we were able to spend the 2 days with Devin Vodika, who was one of the California Superintendents of the Year, and with Katie Marton. So we, on that second day at Design 39, we spent a lot of time wandering the campus in the classrooms, just looking, just watching students. And in every school we went, kids, you can see the pictures, kids have their hands on something and they're doing something. And every single child that we asked, tell me what you're doing, could give us at great length what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they know they were doing at it. And really, the teachers were in the background. They were certainly there, but they were not front and center. Student learning was front and center, and teachers were facilitating that. So I think we all came back really excited and refreshed. And for me, one of the important things was there were lots of things that we saw that we can replicate today. It is not something we have to go out and buy. I don't have to buy this, I don't have to buy that. Things like class meetings or project-based learning or just different kinds of furniture. They can have student-led conferences, and really understanding that learning occurs beyond the classroom walls. So you can tell that I'm very excited, and if they were all speaking, I think you'd hear the same kinds of comments. So very glad to share this with you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Hello. In September, we started working with our elementary core STEM adoption committee. This group will bring a recommendation to the board later this spring for a new curriculum that would be implemented in K-5 classrooms as well as with STEM specialists in the 2020-2021 school year. While classroom, sorry, furniture moving in the background.
We've already done this.
Ashley Ortenzo is our new K-12 STEM instructional facilitator, and she is helping to lead this work. This committee, we were very thoughtful in pulling this committee together. So we wanted to make sure that there was equity of voice among grade levels as well as schools and special programs. So we were intentional in asking at least 2 members from every single grade level to be present in the committee, 2 members from each school to be present, as well as some leadership from highly capable EL, special education, elementary principals, instructional facilitators, as well as Melissa and myself. So it's a pretty large group that is coming together to work through this process. Through this process, we also hope to gain a more cohesive way of performing these curriculum adoptions, regardless of the content area or the grade bands. So Melissa and I are being very thoughtful as we go through this process to think about what would this mean for another subject area or another grade band, and how do we create this model of curriculum adoptions. So our timeline is pictured here, a rough timeline of where we are going. We've had our October meeting and are now in November going to be listening to vendors, hoping to get that field of possibilities narrowed to field test in November through March, late November through March. After field testings, we'll be bringing those results back to the group, as well as for getting feedback from parents, as well as opportunities for students to provide that feedback. And then once consensus is reached by our group, hopefully in April, that recommendation will go to IAC and then come to the school board. After that work, this is just the beginning of that work. So then that work continues of creating some mapping, some curriculum frameworks, as well as professional development for teachers. We will also continue to give you updates throughout this process. So you'll be hearing from us on a frequent basis as May approaches.
So I think the best possible follow-up to all this talk about social emotional learning and design and new schools is really to talk about state test scores. So it just fits right in.
Hopefully.
So, just some quick summary items. An important thing for you to be aware of, state test scores continue to be flat. This is interesting and somewhat puzzling to the broader research community, because typically when states change tests, scores decline and then they kind of steadily go up from there. What we've seen, not just in Washington State, but really across the nation, with the switch to the Common Core tests, there was a rather significant decline. Then there was a rather rapid increase, and then things have been flat from there after that 1 year of increase. If we look at scores on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that really hasn't changed since pre-Common Core going into today. We, again, kind of see the same trend of scores at a national level being fairly flat, really kind of subtle movements there. We do have some changes at the district level that are, some of them are very exciting developments, and some of them are motivating some of the work that we're doing around MTSS and what is it that we really need to help students achieve. And then school scores are really noisy, and I want to talk about that a little bit, because the closer we start to look at smaller subgroups within a single school, within a single grade level, the more we really see that there's large margins for error. So this chart here is a histogram of score distribution within one of our middle schools. They're 6th grade ELA scores. And for every student, we don't just get their score, we also get, with their Smarter Balance score, the plus or minus the standard error range for that score. That standard error varies quite a bit. It's smallest when the student is scoring near the cut score between a level 2 where they're almost proficient and a level 3 where they are proficient. The yellow and green bars that you can see kind of highlighted there, those are all students who scored within the standard error of proficient. That's almost 17% of students within the grade level. So when we think about school grade levels where, you know, the 6th grade scores move up 1% or they move down 1% from year to year, we're not really seeing a lot of actual movement when that happens. We're seeing students who are, again, falling within that margin of error. Because there's a pretty broad point range on Smarter Balanced, that margin of error at the smallest end for middle school is still about 25 points. This, by the way, is one of the things that motivated some of the work at the state level around graduation pathways, when we think about the number of students who were needing to access graduation alternatives because they were scoring within the standard error of the test. This was true also on earlier tests like the WASL and the MSP, but essentially because our data set is much larger, we're, as an education community, much more confident in the standard error that's being reported, and so we can kind of talk about that with some more clarity than what we were able to do before. So Peninsula has a fantastic new data integration analyst, Sarah Banks. She started earlier this year in early August. She's also a very involved parent in the district. And she's built in there, built a public dashboard for you, for members of the community, to really look at and see sort of what's going on. And the dashboard that she's built, which is a live link there, also follows OSPI's suppression rules. So as we get to subgroups that are very small, it does sort of correctly zero out that data so that we don't necessarily see identifiable information for individual students. But within there, you're able to dig around and look at scores and trends over the last several years, really all of the Smarter Balanced years, for at the state level, the school level, and the district level, and looking at all of the tests, not just Smarter Balanced, also the WCAS, our science test, and then ELPA 21 for our English language learners, as well as the older EOC for biology are all represented there. You're also able to drill down and really look at subgroups performance there and think about various underserved populations. It's a really powerful tool, and I think one of the things that it's helping us see is the need as we continue on our MTSS work and we continue putting these systems in place for social emotional learning. One of our next steps that we've been discussing is really working around reading and supporting English language arts, which is something that we're seeing as a need as we look at our data over time. Yeah.
Question about the histogram on the bottom of number 11. Maybe it seems obvious. Are those years?
Yes, and actually,
Grade levels and years? There's
correct.
no
So those are
font.
years going across.
Okay.
And if you're able to take a look at this, because this is shared with the board electronically as well. Is that right? So if you're able to click on that link, you can. It's fully interactive, and then yeah, scrolling down will show that the years there.
So just a quick question, and I have a great appreciation for all the work that you all are doing, but when you look at that, the test scores sort of flattening over time, has anyone actually asked about what if it's the test versus students needing support?
So have we asked that within Peninsula, or has sort of the broader?
State as part of
state.
well,
State looked at,
you know what I mean, just the broader look at it,
Yeah.
because, so, I mean, I was a parent, I think WASLA was before MSP, right?
Mhm.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Sorry. And generally speaking, I mean, we tended to do well, there was growth, you know, yada, 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 right? Then SBAC comes, it's supposed to be a smarter test. It's supposed to, you know, relate to core, all of these things. We've had curriculum now for several years that's supposed to align with the core. And so when I look at that flattening and all the work that our staff has been doing district-wide, I guess, has anyone posed the question to the people who developed the test? You know, maybe it's you.
Absolutely. That's
I mean,
definitely,
you know,
yeah.
I'm just wondering.
Yeah, that's certainly a question that parent groups, schools, districts, and to a lesser extent, states have certainly asked that question. One thing that I would throw out right away is that with the WASL or the MSP, ultimately the state decided what the passing score was going to be every year. Certainly there have been states, I'm not directly saying that OSPI has done this, but there have been states that set passing rates from year to year for political reasons. With Smarter Balance, because we belong to, as a state, to a much larger consortium, that value for what a passing score represents was established several years ago, and it's maintained at the same level this whole time. So another thing I would say is that a lot of the work that we've done as we start looking at the Peninsula Promise and the things that are being measured by Panorama, a lot of that work around social emotional learning and a lot of that kind of new energy, those are skills and competencies that aren't measured here. And so Smarter Balanced measures the things that it purports to measure. It's fairly reliable as we look at student performance from year to year, but it's also not measuring anything resembling the whole child, which is why we go out and look at other things that we can do to kind of get an idea of how we're supporting our students broader than just this one test at this one point in time.
You have a question?
I have several comments, but just to stick on this slide, sort of piggyback off what Leslie said, I was not sure if I was thinking the same thing, but to me, looking at these scores, and I know this is going to sound negative, but to me, this doesn't sound like a success. When we have 26% of our sixth grade students aren't meeting passing. So whether it's the test or the student or what, I'm just wondering, how do we look at this holistically to get more than 70, we haven't even hit 75% of the kids. So, you know, and I'm just, what are we doing to try and bring that up? And I don't know if I articulated that as well as it was in my head, but I just, when 26% of our students aren't meeting passing, you know, it's unfortunate at the state and its infinite wisdom, but what are we doing to address trying to bring that number up?
Yeah, so as we start thinking about next steps, there are a few specific things that we really look at. So student growth percentiles always come out from the state late in October, which is right around now. And those really give us an idea of how much our students are growing relative to students who scored similarly the prior year. And so then we can get an idea of Okay, so we know something about student performance. What about what they're learning once they're here? And so that can allow us to kind of identify what are some things that seem to be working really well in certain schools. We're also able to look at peer institutions around the state and kind of get an idea of if there are other places where growth is happening really well that are perhaps demographically similar to Peninsula, and what can we dig into. Those really allow us to ask better questions more than they allow us to provide really specific answers. Principals and school improvement teams are then able to kind of come up with plans. What are the specific actions they're going to take at any of those schools? Really, at this point, I think I'd be safe in assuming that our school improvement plans are going to revolve around using a multi-tiered system of supports and really looking at how are we screening students for supports beyond core instruction, and then how are we determining whether those intervention supports that we've offered are really working. And we need a system in place to really kind of come up with those decisions. And then connected to that, we've had for, this is our third year, some diagnostic assessments, iReady being one of them, DIBELS is another, where we're able to see what are some of the specific skills, say with reading, that our students are struggling with, and really get down into some really specific details about, okay, here's a phonics issue that our early readers are struggling with, and that'll guide some of our work with third grade as an example.
Lori? I have some questions.
Yeah,
And
me
on
too.
earlier part of the presentation as well, but we'll stick with this one. So, for now.
For now.
No, I mean, this is amazing. Sarah's done a great job of putting this together. Fantastic, love it. This is one snapshot of probably thousands and thousands and thousands we could look at, correct?
Right.
So my question to you is kind of threefold. As a board, am I responsible for going out and looking at these thousands and thousands of snapshots? Or when do I expect as a board to see some of this data come forward to us? Are we going to see it in SIP plans, or like, what do we do with this now as a board? And then I've got more on that, but as a board.
Okay, yeah. So we want to make sure that you had access to that data. It's all public information, and so you have access to the extent that you want to dig in there. I think that while you can go to the state report card to get much of this same information, the tool that Sarah's built out is a lot more flexible and a lot more convenient.
I've seen it, it's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So you will start seeing that in school improvement plans.
Okay.
We also really want to look at that with the growth, because proficiency tells one part of the academic story and growth really tells another part of the story, and we need to look at those two things together. We're somewhat hamstrung by the fact that the state always chooses to release proficiency scores by September 10th, and then growth whenever they get around to it, which is generally the end of October. And so we'll have some specific pieces to share, I think, as we get further in, and as we know more about some of our MTSS strategies for addressing these gaps, then we'll be able to kind of identify, here's the reason why we're taking some of these specific intervention steps.
Okay. I know we have a calendar, and we've got some different reports, and I'm sure a lot of this information will feed into there, but
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of information here that we could be, using as a board. So then that moves down to my next question then. How then have the teachers been introduced to this, and what are you doing with training with them, and what do you do with this information now? I mean, they're used to seeing it through the state, but like, have we supported our teachers with this information?
So our teachers, other than the public dashboard, we're transitioning, I think we could say, towards providing them with a similar dashboard view, except that would then allow them to actually drill down to individual students as well, which is something they can't get through the state. And it's something that we've provided them in the past essentially through spreadsheets, but not necessarily through charts and interactives. That's going to be a really big step. Going with that is a transition piece that Sarah and I are working on, which is really trying to figure out how do we maintain student security and student data privacy as we do that. Yeah. And so as we transition towards a system where teachers have row-level access to student information and can really dig into dashboards and be presented with that information, that's going to open things up for teachers, because it's going to be providing them with the data as opposed to requiring them to go out and really dig.
Yeah. Okay, and then one step farther is parents and community. I mean, if they're going to see, I know they won't see the individual information, right? No. But it's gonna, how do they put that into context? If they have questions, are you guys gonna get, bombarded with tons of questions from our community? Are we prepared for that? And like, what does that look like?
I love talking to parents about scores like it just because it's so easy for folks to become sort of misinformed or make assumptions, and I really enjoy those conversations. With informing parents, we're working on a couple of different things, but one piece is actually providing electronic notifications of score reports, so that we're not mailing home the letters from the state, but we're able to provide the context that we can and deliver that electronically. My goal is that by the end of June, that we're able to provide scores from this spring. We know at least their students' preliminary scores at that point in the spring, and they rarely change over the summer as the state does kind of their final quality audit. That doesn't happen much anymore. That's one of the advantages of the online testing world, is that we do have access to the data much faster.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is where I got to, John Helwood introduced it to me, and it was just an amazing tool. I think it's gonna help us a lot look at a lot of different things in a lot of different groups in a lot of different areas, and then how we move through what we do with it in our school improvements, and how to grow from there. Any other questions for James?
No, I have follow-up, but I'll follow up after tomorrow.
I just have a
Not to
comment.
keep,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Leslie?
I just had a comment that the electronic communication you said with context is something that our parents have been starving for.
Yeah.
So I am so excited that you've identified that and that you found a way to communicate with them about these scores, because ever since SBAC sort of came about, a lot of parents saying, well, what do I do with this information?
Right.
Right? How does that help me inform what I'm doing with my student at home? So thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
I've been
Yeah.
filing the piece of paper in a file, and I don't know what to
Right?
do with it.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
it's good.
So,
Excellent.
yay.
And I would say specifically, if there's something that you want to see, let us know.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm gonna follow up with you, because I got, your comments generated about 20 more questions, so I don't wanna hold this up, so I'll follow up. Okay, but I have more.
So we had more presenters tonight, Chris,
But,
Natalie, and,
yeah,
and,
I have questions.
oh, for James?
Slide 7. I'm glad you're here, I've been waiting for this. You made comments about, as far as your committee and how you made up your committee, and, pretty broad committee. No parents on the initial committee, just on the field test, so,
The field test is the teachers
okay,
with curriculum in their classrooms going through a unit. So in April, after the field test results have been brought in, and then there's some feedback from teachers, that's the point that we will have the availability for parents to take a look at the curriculum that's being considered and ask for their feedback based on that.
because I know in the past we've had some hiccups on some rollouts, I just didn't wanna, I wanted to find out at what point do the parents come into play to make sure that they're
Absolutely.
communicated with early, because I know sometimes they didn't find out till a little bit late, and we got some feedback on that.
Yes.
Not positive. And so I just want to make sure that the parents are brought in on an early stage in this, because it sounds really cool, but that was my question on that.
Thank you. Well, and the assumption is that you're following the board policies and procedures regarding the curriculum rollout, making sure it's available to the public, right? And that will all be communicated, so.
Yep.
I have a related comment to that, and I'm probably gonna completely embarrass myself, but, the STEM adoption, where does this fit into our science curriculum? I wasn't fully aware that we were going down this path, so I apologize for being, like I said, embarrassing myself here, but
No.
how does this fit into a STEM adoption that we just did several years ago, or a science adoption we did, and where does it go?
You might be thinking of the middle school science adoption that would have been a
Yes.
few years ago.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
So this is for
This is elementary.
elementary.
Right, K-5.
Okay.
And currently, we do not have a STEM or science curriculum. So historically, we had the FOSS kits.
Yep.
And those disappeared 4 years ago. And so we have not been consistently teaching, or we didn't provide our teachers curriculum. So it's been hit and miss. So we've just, and now it's time to do this work.
Okay.
And it isn't just science, because the way that the standards are written for science, right, the next generation science standards include technology and engineering. And it, in addition to the STEM, we'll also be looking at computer science standards and ed tech standards that Washington released last year.
Okay, thank you for clearing
It
that
is the
up.
complete package.
Yeah, and I completely appreciate you bringing in different, every school and making sure that there's enough people from every school and every grade. And do you, with this committee, are you looking at the middle school science curriculum and making sure we're feeding into that, or does that, I know it's STEM versus science, but, well, I guess all of it then.
Yeah, one of the vendors that is a finalist at this point, not, I shouldn't say finalist, one of the ones that's at the November vendor presentation is Amplify. That is one that has scored highly on our rubrics, and that is what our middle schools are currently using.
Okay.
And we will have, we will partner with middle school teachers as we get closer to the end
That's
and
great.
have those conversations with how do we make this roll up as seamless as possible between elementary and middle school. In terms of students, what experiences will students have in elementary STEM,
Yep.
and what does that look like in middle school? So it informs both the elementary and the middle school teachers' work.
Okay. Did you ask the parents' involvement in this?
What-
Did did somebody ask about the parent involvement in this?
David.
Yes.
I did,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I thought I heard. Okay.
So I have more questions, but before the board talking, y'all, Hope or Carrie, you have any comments, any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so slide 5. So first, I just want to say that the 6 years I've been on the board, I think I've been very impressed that when we have heard previous SIP plans, and we hear, say, KPMS has developed something that was just amazing, and the student achievement was soared, amazing growth, that they shared that information across the district. And every year, whenever I hear something, I'm just really impressed that our district and our schools share that information. They don't keep it to themselves, and so I really like that. A couple of years ago, I was on I sat on the Students of Distinction, and a couple of years ago, I did the academic achievement one. And one of the questions we asked one of the students were, what do you want to see in 5 years happen? And I think I know who the kid is, but I'm not going to say because I might get it wrong. But he said that students today are too engrossed in digital and social media, and that they're just locked into their phones, and that he'd hoped that in 5 years they would start to go back and come full circle back to the analog. So it really makes me happy to hear that that's happening. Being familiar with Poway, California, I know that's a very expensive place to live, and Design 39, I'm wondering, would you be able to have something like Design 39 at a location that maybe isn't as influential and well off as Poway, California? So that's that question. And
Yeah, so.
I invite all of us that were
Sure,
there.
I'll chime in a little bit on this. So some of the things that we saw at Design 39 was not the building itself. It's the instruction that was taking place in the classrooms, the ownership of the students. We talked to a teacher, who talked about her first day of school, and we're like, well, what was the first day like? And she said all of her furniture was sitting in a pile in the center of the classroom. There was nothing on the walls because she and her students were going to decide together what was that classroom going to look like for the year, because that was what was important to them. And that's kind of the philosophy that we saw, is the students and the teachers together working to build what their classroom is like for the year, what are they learning for the year. The picture in the bottom right corner, this was kind of they had 4 or 5 big guiding questions for the year that drove kind of their learning. And so this was one of them that they were working on in their classroom. And it was, they figured out their learning, their projects, and the things that they do around these big guiding questions for the year. And so this is a question that the class was, interested in about border boundaries. So they were studying kind of things around that and having concepts around that. So as far as as Melissa said, we came back and there's nothing that we really need to buy. We can do all of the stuff that we saw there in any of our schools right now, whether they be brand new or all of our existing schools. It's really just the learning that takes place in the classroom.
Okay, and my last question is around the passion board there. If each of the kids puts their passion up there and then they're doing some learning based on that, and there's a curriculum involved, and the teacher is more of a facilitator or guiding them in there. How are they, is it challenging for the teacher to keep them and help them achieve whatever their curriculum, or do they have an actual curriculum that they have to have their students have a pack? Did that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So the guide really is what are the Common Core state standards, and having teachers be able to say, let's take a large enduring understanding of this large essential question. What do we want to know about boundaries? And this was 4th grade, so you would be tying some of the California state history in, and so knowing your standards well enough to say, this is where those powerful writing standards come in, or this is where the reading standards are. Here's STEM, and here's social studies, and here's listening and speaking, and here's computer science. So you have to have teachers that are well versed in that and deeply versed. So as students are doing that, they're saying, here are the standards that we're covering. How are we going to assess? I mean, this is like this tiny snapshot. We did have some students say, I did this and it didn't work, and I did this, which is engineering, right? I tried something else. So having assessments along the way, but it's not the stand and deliver from a textbook, page 1, then page 2, then page 3.
Yeah.
They do have curriculum. You know, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade teachers or students still need to learn to read. So you would have that. But would you have a social studies book and just do chapter 1, chapter 2? No,
Yeah.
it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, I was just in the back of my mind wondering, is there additional professional development for the teachers to go
Yes.
through? I would think would be
Oh,
a
yes.
lot in
Yes.
order to teach this way.
Lots of collaboration for teachers. So, and what I think is so unique about our district, I've worked in a number of districts, and I've never ever had a weekly collaboration time, release time. If you were lucky, if you could get it once a month. So it is a rare gift to have that time, and we want to make sure that we're using that to its fullest. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Leslie, Lori? Either one?
I really love the aspirational piece. I love the concept and the idea of it. Thanks. I guess I'm wondering if you included staff in the conversation, teachers, classroom teachers, to see what that looks like, because there's so many wonderful things out there, but then how do you integrate it so it's not one more thing? I do see a lot of professional development around that, and we don't get a lot of state money for that. So I guess as you move forward, I would be curious to hear how you're addressing those challenges. Because, I mean, I think it's a great idea, but the reality is what does that look like in the classroom? And does it add something, or is it something that can be integrated? Because we may not have to buy anything, but time costs too. And they don't have enough planning time, and so kind of taking all those things into consideration.
Yeah. I think it's taking existing systems and looking to see where we have those opportunities. I believe our teachers can absolutely do this. And you know what, in reality, many of them already are.
Any questions from Kara or Hope? Yeah? No? Exciting stuff, huh? Yeah. Very much appreciate the idea of, let's go down and look at the magnet school stuff, but it's much more than that. You're looking at all of our schools, and that's what I'm hoping that the
Yes.
focus of Department of Learning and Innovation, it is going across our entire district and how it's benefiting. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the time.
Any other comments, questions?
Thank you.
I got one final question.
Um,
Being married to a teacher and my son's a teacher, one of the things that we used to see on the little cartoon about, was it I don't know if it was an elephant trying to climb a tree, or the more
Oh.
tool belts you put on the person, they can't climb the tree. I just want to make sure that I know that teachers are burdened enough and they have enough on their plate, that we're working with the unions and the teachers to make sure that they have a part in this whole process.
Absolutely, that's critical to what we're doing. And I think we have a lot of learning to do ourselves. And I think what we're starting to realize is there's a lot of things that we currently do that probably can come off the plate to help move some of this forward. So I think that we're going to be freeing up some of the burdens, as you call it there, as we move forward, to allow for this to happen.
And as Dr. Carroll said, we do have a lot, and you heard Melissa say, a lot of teachers that are doing things that are more learner-centered all the time, lots of pilots. And one of our leadership challenges, how do we expose everyone, as Dave was saying, they don't happen in isolation? How do we make sure everybody sees these things so that everybody can move from more of that teacher-centered to more
And it happens over time gradually.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. At our last board meeting, the board had requested some additional information on the levy, and Karen Anderson will now come forward with the levy planning information. Thank you, Karen.
So tonight, I'm bringing information to you. Elena, I asked Elena to just come up and sit because a lot of the information that I'm going to share with you actually does come from the committee work. The other piece is that tonight is where we are going to ask you for, or I'm going to ask you for, some decisions and some direction. And so we can do it one of two ways. I can walk through the questions that I'm going to ask. There's basically 4 areas that we need to cover. And I can take you through that process, and then we can go back and we can have the discussion, or we can have the discussion for each section. So, for instance, the first thing that we need to talk about is the duration of the levy. What do we want that to be? We had talked about other districts that will be running in February of 2020. Orting always does a 2-year levy. They've always done a 2-year levy. They're going to continue to do a 2-year levy. Derringer has done a 2-year levy in the past. This year they're going to do a 3-year levy because they passed a 6-year tech levy, and they want to coincide with that renewal when they come up at 6 years. So they're looking at a 3-year levy. Sumner, Clover Park, Eatonville are all continuing to do 4-year levies. And so there will be a little bit of a difference depending on what we decide to do, but we'll either in sync with other districts if we continue to do a 4-year levy, or if we do a 3-year levy, we might only have maybe one other district on the ballot with us in the future. But for right now, it's just deciding whether or not we want to do 3 years or 4 years.
So does the board want to discuss the number of years for the levy right now, or do you want to hear the entire levy context and then come back to these questions?
Section by section.
Section by section. Well, we do it by section, but, okay, so we will then open up the discussion for running the levy to replace the expiring levy. That is currently a 4-year levy expiring in 2020. And so we need to decide if we would like to move forward with a 3-year or a 4-year levy. Does anyone have any initial thoughts?
Well, let Marcia go first.
Well, one of the questions I had before was, there are a lot of large districts that aren't on this list, and they're also running levies, and you said before
These are the
that-
only ones in Pierce County that are running levies in 2020.
No, this year.
Yes.
But I'm talking about in future years, that Puyallup and Bethel
There's this-
and Tacoma,
Right.
and all those will be running levies as well.
They'll be running in 2021.
Okay, so their levies will be expiring a year from now. They will be
Yes, They
running.
ran in 2018.
2021.
So they'll run in
So
22,
they're
or if they're
2
3
years off from us.
Yeah.
So if we ran a 2-year levy, we would be on the same cycle that they are, correct?
Correct.
Which might reduce election costs.
On their
Because they're
current,
bigger.
on their current cycle,
Cycle,
which they
yeah,
could also
yeah.
change,
Right.
and then we'd be off again. So
have to go
I think we'd continue
I'm
and
assuming-
be chasing other districts if we
Yeah.
approached it like that, but it's
But I
definitely a
think
good thought.
the larger districts typically run 4-year levies.
If we ran a 2 years. Yes, typically they
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
Historically, have those larger districts just run 4-year? Has there been variances?
I'd have to go back and look at that. I honestly don't know. I know that we, for a couple of years there, we ran 3-year levies, and we were trying to get off of the presidential election year. And so that might have caused us to go off cycle with the majority of the districts. But I think there's just lots of different reasons why districts make decisions on when they're going to, you know, whether they're going to do a 3-year or a 4-year. I would say that right now, I think it's a gamble for everyone. A lot of the districts that went out in 2018, they were subject to that $1.50, and so now the parameters have changed again, and so there's a possibility that they might have a supplemental, but not very many are, and so it's just kind of hard to know what's going to happen in the next 3 years, I would say.
David?
So for me personally, I wouldn't support 2 years. I
I've
just-
been there, done that.
No,
I'm
I'm not
not.
saying you did, I'm just saying, so my turn, I'm saying I wouldn't support 2 years. And I agree with Deb, I don't want to chase other districts. I know that our community is sort of used to 4-year levies, 4-year cycles, but I know that you talked about it at a previous board meeting, that we have no idea what the state legislature is going to do, and to go out 4 years could lock us into something that we may regret. So I would be, if the rest of the board was open to a 3, I would support a 3-year. I just know the community is used to the 4-year. That's why I asked the question about the name. You know, they're fickle community. They're sort of like, don't like
That's
change.
another section.
Yeah,
that-
right, I know. So for me, I would support a 3-year levy.
You're supporting a three-year at this time?
I'd support
Okay.
both, but I would support a 3
3-year.
at the
I
board.
agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, Marcia?
And I would say that the committee was, I think the committee leaned more for a 3-year as opposed to a 4-year.
Okay.
Mainly not knowing, now that we're limited to student enrollment and what that looks like, and we just don't know what the volatility or the variation is going to be in enrollment. And so a 3-year gives us a little bit less, you know, predictability out there, up to 4 years.
I just had a clarifying question,
Mhm.
I guess. So if we ran a 3-year levy,
Mhm.
which would expire in 2023,
Correct.
that's the budget year for the ledge. And if they were going to make any kind of shifts, that's the year it would happen.
Mhm.
Is there any value, or is in waiting and doing a 4-year levy, so we'll know kind of what's happening if they change it,
Mhm.
and then kind of figure it out? We have another year to kind of communicate to the community and figure out,
Mhm.
you know, I mean, it's a big if, because
Yeah.
we don't know if
Yeah.
they're going to do anything.
Mhm.
So I would be interested to hear what my colleagues think about that.
Right, and that's another piece
Right,
that
yeah.
I don't know that we really even talked about at the committee, and
Right.
So it is one more thing to think about, you know, so.
Do you have any thoughts on 3-year versus a 4, other than the
Well,
clarifying question?
Well, I would like to know how the other board members weigh in, if that should be, how that should be weighted, you know, as far as, because 2023 is a budget year.
Yeah.
And, you know, how much do we want to weigh the possibility that they may or may not change it? I'm just curious.
Okay, Lori, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not on
that
that, no, not on that specifically. I
On
mean,
the budget
I
for
don't-
the ledge?
My response would be, I don't care.
Okay,
So-
Marcia?
Right, I agree. And if the laws change,
Yeah.
they're going
Yeah.
to change. And
Yeah.
that's why I think the committee recommended somewhat higher levy, amount, because to give us some capacity to move around. So I'm good with 3, I'm good with 4.
And for me, I think it's an important one, but there's so many variables to think about. It's like
Right.
focusing in on one may,
Mhm.
to make the decision
Mhm.
may hurt us. But yeah, something to think about it for sure. But, so with that, 3 or 4, any thoughts on that? On which direction you'd like to go?
I'm fine with 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I appreciate everyone's feedback on that, because I just
Yeah.
didn't know how to weigh it.
Yeah, it's a good thought. Lori?
Okay, I just need to ask a question again about the cost to run a ballot measure. Is there, which I understand there, so I understand that, but when we're looking at like Ording and Derringer and all this, is it just a function of if you had 3 other districts running, we would, it would cost us X amount, or does it matter if it's Ording versus Tacoma and UP versus Derringer, if it's 3 big districts, does that cost less? Or is it just?
It depends. So based on, it's really on the voter's pamphlet, the cost. We all split the share. Because it's a special election, if there's no one else running anything for that election, then we would bear the cost of the entire election. But with other districts, there is a cost that is split, and it's based on the number of voters in your jurisdiction. So,
If you can, it's nice.
because it's based on the ballots that get sent out.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so if you have smaller districts, depending on how many voters they have, and we have more voters than probably any of those districts listed.
Okay, and so, but is the cost, I'm not asking for amounts exactly, but just is the cost to run something so significant that that should be a massive factor in whether we do, I mean,
No.
I'm trying to
No.
me, this is completely uneducated comment, but it would seem to me that the whole piece of the state's gonna do and trying to do the best we can to foresee that would seem to be a bigger piece than the cost of a ballot measure, but I don't know if that's true.
So I would say that part of it is the cost, but part of it is the message. So if there are other districts running EP&O levies, then the message is common, and the message isn't just here, it's out in other areas, neighboring districts. And so you see signs, and you see, when you go outside of this area, you're gonna see those types of things, and it just kind of, it's one more message, and if it's a common message, and for a common thing, then it's a little bit more apparent.
That makes sense.
Than if you're running by yourself and you're the only ones that have signs out there.
Okay.
So that's the only, that's the other thing that you might think about.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
So Lori, with that information, do you have a preference on 3 or 4 years?
I would be inclined to say, I would be inclined to say 4 years, because, but again, I would say that could be based on misinformation or assumptions that, because to me, it seems like that is the most logical thing to do here, but, so that's just my thought
Okay.
right now.
That's good. All right. So my thoughts on it, and especially after listening to all of you, is while I'm sensitive and aware of the cost to run an election, a special election, whatever, I think the variables that go into what builds our levy spending plan could far outweigh that cost of running a levy. And running, if you run a 3-year levy, you have to project out 4 years. If you run a 4-year levy, you have to project out 5 years. And so I think we could be more vulnerable if we have to project out longer, and we're wrong. And we're usually not, though, Karen, are we? Sorry. So for me, I think we are more at risk of running a longer-term levy cost to our schools and a cost to our taxpayers if we run it longer. Okay. So for me, I am more inclined to go with a 3-year. So with that, I think we appreciate all of the comments, but I think we're, as a board, looking at a 3-year levy moving forward. Unless there's other comments that we would like to continue on.
Well, that will be a big deal if it grows.
Exactly.
That's
Enrollment
big.
is a very big variable, so. Okay, Karen, if we'd like to move on to the next.
Okay. Next one, David's topic. This is on the levy ballot title. So when we bring you a resolution, the resolution will have the levy ballot title on it. And that is basically, what are we going to call this levy, this replacement levy? All other districts in Pierce County that are running levies this year are going to continue to use the Educational Programs and Operations Replacement Levy. Last year, when districts ran levies, they were under the enrichment, the new enrichment rule, that levies were enrichment levies. And when they talked with the county auditor, they were allowed, the county auditor, Pierce County auditor, is allowing districts to continue with the EPNO replacement levies. They are not requiring that enrichment be in the title. And I think when we brought it to you last week, we talked about putting that into the title if it was a requirement. We've also talked with the committee, and they believe that we should continue to call it our Educational Programs and Operations, but call it a replacement levy, because it truly is a replacement. A lot of the things that we're currently doing with our levy funds are enrichment. They are considered enrichment. So that's where the committee was.
Okay, so for this, especially since other districts are running the EPNO replacement levy without having the word enrichment, does anyone feel strongly, and we can open it up to whatever, but does anyone feel strongly about having the word enrichment in the title?
Me?
You want enrichment in
No,
the title?
I don't want it.
Okay, if someone's feeling strongly about having enrichment in the title, so are we
Instant
okay
consensus.
with replacement enrichment levy?
If they'll let us.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And they
Yeah,
will.
and I guess, yeah, I mean, to your point, if everyone else is running an EPNO replacement levy and we add enrichment in there, it's like, what else are we getting that they're not? And it's not,
Well,
we're not.
And we had discussion at the committee had conversation about enrichment, and I think there's still some struggles about enrichment, because this really isn't all enrichment. It's because we still are missing funding from the state level, whether it's for special ed or for staffing above and beyond the state allocations. Whether it is for athletics, they don't give us funding for athletics and extracurricular activities. And these are basic needs. These are not enrichment per se. And so misleading the public and saying that this is all enrichment could be detrimental.
And based off of the discussion of the committee and what is going to be afforded in this levy that now has a levy lid, and we're more limited in what we can do, we are just funding what we have been funding over the last 4 years. So we're not funding
Correct.
anything new. We're not bringing any new programs in with this. This is just getting us by with what we have had.
Yeah.
Is that
There
correct?
might be decisions about how we're
Right.
spending that from year to year, but yeah, it's
Okay.
pretty much basics.
So, education programs and operations replacement levy, is that a title that everyone can move forward with? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to cut the conversation short, so. Any comments on the title? Okay.
Okay,
So
now
we
you're,
got that down.
now you're gonna see a lot of numbers. Scenario 1, so I'm going back to the work that the committee did and the assumptions that they used. They came out with the proposed levy amounts in bold about 2/3 down in the page, or the slide. And so when the committee did their work, what they were focused on was looking at that potential rollback. So they said, okay, if we take the estimated enrollment, what we think is going to happen with student enrollment, and we multiply it by the amount per student, we get a certain dollar amount. That's probably what we're going to be eligible for. That would be our lesser amount. But we want to go above that, and we want to build in some flexibility in case we're off by enrollment. So that's what the committee focused on, was giving that cushion, and so they went above. They weren't focused on a specific proposed tax rate, which is only calculated based on the dollar amount that you're asking for and what they were estimating for assessed value. And they were conservative with what was going to happen with assessed value over time. And so their estimated tax rates with these dollar amounts go from about $1.57 to out to $1.59. If we're looking at the 3 years, it would be $1.57, $1.58, $1.59. And again, these are estimated rates because we're estimating assessed value. The only thing that wouldn't change would be the dollar amount. For scenario 2, this is the scenario that I brought to you last time, and this is if you wanted to consider a flat tax rate. And again, it's an estimated rate, but the numbers are a little bit different, slightly less. The assessed values have been adjusted up to bring the tax rate down to $1.50. So the overall question is the dollar amounts and whether or not the estimated tax rates are important, if you want them to be different or if you want them to be consistent and close to the $1.50. That's basically the question.
I have a quick question when
Sure.
you talk about flat tax rate, because it's still an estimate, right? So
It's-
if the
it's-
numbers don't come in,
yes.
enrollment doesn't come in, we're
Well,
gonna
if the
be,
assessed value, yes.
we'll be asking less than that because the numbers don't
Yes,
support it.
no matter
correct?
what, the actual levied amounts each year, and I put this at the bottom of the slide, there's gonna be a calculation. The county auditor is gonna have to do the calculation every year. They're gonna look at 250 times the assessed value, and they're gonna say, okay, that's way over. Then they're gonna do the calculation with the student enrollment times the dollar amount, and they're gonna come up with that. If that is above the amount that we have had voters approve, then we will be limited to the amount that the voters approve. If it is less than what the voters approved, we will be forced to move down to that lesser amount.
Okay. So, not a question, just now a question to the board. Under the Finance and Audit Committee assumptions, their estimated enrollment is lower than what the flat rate tax adjustments that Karen has proposed here, as well as the assessed value. The assessed value is lower than what Karen is projecting out. So we need to decide as a board then if we want to proceed with either of those scenarios. And does anyone want to start, David?
So for me, first off, for the Audit and Finance Committee, thanks for all your hard work. Over the past year, when I've been out in the community and when we were knocking on doors for the bond back in February, the state legislature was still in just starting session, and we didn't have a clue what they were going to do. Okay, and at that time, from last year, it was $1.50. Okay, so when I was talking to people, and they were saying, if I support the bond, my taxes are going to go up, and then you're going to increase our levy, and I'm like, no, it's $1.50. The state mandated $1.50, and so I was telling people that's what it was. So this is just me, and just not the whole book, just me. And then so with my communications with members of the community and so forth, that it's $1.50, it's $1.50, and that's where it's going to be. Okay, well, as long as it doesn't go above $1.50, I'll be supportive of it. Okay, then the legislature did what they're famous for, and they changed it, and raised it to $2.50. Fortunately for us, not the right word. Okay, we're at $2,500, and just by coincidence, it works out to $1.50. Okay, so, and then in conversations I've had with other entities within the community about whether there would be support for the levy if it was to be at $1.50, or like we had said when we were doorbelling and asking for support, that we would probably get support for the levy rather than opposition for the levy if it was at $1.50. So my concern would be if it was to go with scenario one, and it goes out that it could be $1.57 or $1.58, then it goes against what, people have told me we might get support for if it was above 50. So for me personally, based on that and my conversations with members of the community and what I talked to people about when I was out doorbelling, I personally would pick scenario number 2.
So can I just add, not to make it even more complex, but it is complex. Keep in mind that the differences that you're looking at, because the differences for the tax rates, the estimated tax rates, are based on estimates. So if you wanted to pick your dollar amount, if it was between scenario 1 and scenario 2, we could make assumptions that would make a $1.50 flat tax rate. So that's the question that we're kind of asking is, what's the importance of a flat tax rate versus a variable tax rate versus the dollar amount? Because the dollar amount is what the voters are going to approve.
But for me, just to add one more thing for the board, to consider, I hope strongly, when you look at the numbers up there between scenario 1 and scenario 2, scenario 1 and the difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2 is
it's not that
much.
Right.
In 2023, it's only $25,000 difference. And so
Exactly.
for me, in 2024, it's only $50,000. When you're talking about 29 million, 50,000 is a hiccup. And so for me personally, with my conversations with members of the community, to say that there wouldn't be opposition to scenario 2, but there might be to scenario 1. For me, I don't want to take a risk for that, so I'm going to stick to scenario 2. There's just not enough of a difference for me to say scenario 1 makes more sense. So, and I don't want to risk opposition. So.
Lori?
Well, that was going to be my actual same comment, was that the amounts are so similar except for the first year where it's $500,000. So I would agree that it seems like scenario 2 is easier to explain for one thing to voters and taxpayers. But
So are you saying that let me see if I can, the dollar amount is too much in scenario 1 versus scenario 2? If we went with the dollar amount in scenario 1 and changed the parameters or the estimates for assessed value, would you get to $1.50? So what I'm saying is that, is it the dollar amount that you're worried about, the higher dollar amount, or because they're not that far apart, is it that you want to share that $1.50 estimated tax rate? Because we can build the scenario that can give you that higher amount and the flat tax rate.
well, yeah, then I would say if we can get there a different way, that would be great also. I just think the $1.50 is easier to communicate to people.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Leslie?
So scenario 2, what would the impacts be? Because scenario 1 includes the buffer, right, the increased enrollment?
They both kind of
do?
Yeah. With scenario 2, what I did was I took what the committee had come up with, and Art and I were trying to get to $1.50, and what would that take? And some of it was we had to change the assumption for assessed value. Some of it was we changed the projections for enrollment. whereas we didn't build it into, we built it into the estimated enrollment as opposed to building it into the buffer amount. And so there were some, I'll say, adjustments to the assumptions that the committee had originally come up.
So the estimated enrollment buffer is that in case this district grows more than we'd anticipated, we didn't
Exactly.
foresee it.
Yes.
But if I understand from the last presentation too, is that if we do not meet that enrollment,
We would roll back
we
to
would roll it back.
the actual, yes.
I'm still thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Marcia?
When I look at the numbers and the amounts, let's not talk about the tax rate for a minute. There's really not that much difference
No.
between the bold black numbers and the amount. Probably the biggest difference is in the first year, but there's very little difference between 2022 and 2023. So I kind of like using those assumptions and as opposed to, I'm not really comfortable with what we just said. And using the $1.50, which I think is good, we can say actually that we kept it at a pretty level amount for each year in terms of comparison.
To get to her point, over 4 years, I just did the math, over 4 years, you get on scenario 1, 110 million, and over scenario 2, 109 million. And that's just in the grand scheme of, when you're
Right.
talking hundreds of millions, $1 million is just not significant enough for me to pick scenario 1, so.
So Marcia, are you saying
I like scenario 2.
because of the ease of the communication and
Well,
the
in our discussion and how we talked
and
about this tonight,
yes.
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
And I know that some of what we've seen, some variable taxes out on the key and changes in tax rates, the bonds coming on. I just be careful about people that are trying to age in place and meet their tax bill and all the rest.
That's important.
Still more thinking time, Leslie?
No, it's a good conversation. I am leaning towards scenario 2. I think that our district has done a pretty good job estimating enrollment for the most part. I think that we're getting a better handle on it. And the amounts really just aren't that much for a budget of our size that we have. So, yeah, my leaning is towards scenario 2.
Okay.
One more question.
Yes.
Just a question for Elena. I'm scouring your report here, so if this is in here, I apologize. Did you guys have a recommendation? I mean, I'm seeing where you say we didn't put a high priority on meeting, precisely $1.50 per thousand, but.
Their suggestion is scenario 1.
That's what because it does say 157.
That's what they had worked out, yes.
Okay, so that makes more sense.
Okay,
And scenario 2 is because I made the assumption that this is going to be the actual, what you estimate to be the enrollment without the buffer.
There's still a buffer.
It's just not
Because we
500
went
students.
above what the estimated enrollment was,
By
but.
approximately how many students do you? You can ballpark it.
What did Lori say?
I'll go back to her in a minute. It might have been, I think the committee's buffer was 500, and I think in scenario 2, it was slightly lower.
Okay, that's fine, yeah.
So I want to say it was maybe closer to 4.
Okay.
So I'm satisfied with 2.
Okay. And Lori, I'll let you think a little bit more.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
For me, so just to clarify, what we are approving, or what we're suggesting to move forward with for this resolution is the amount that we're collecting per year, so
That we're getting
that
put
we're
on
gonna
the
collect.
ballot, yes.
The $1.50 that would be, or the $1.57, whichever
Right.
scenario we go under, will be listed as an estimated tax rate.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what we're asking to move forward with, one of those things. So those are the two things we're approving. I too am kind of leaning towards scenario 2, mainly because I think the estimates on number of students and assessed value, we've always been very, very conservative, and I think this is more actually reflective of what's going to happen. And while I appreciate being conservative, I think it's a great way to go. I do think that we have had higher enrollment and higher assessed value every year, and I think that we should put that out there to public. And if it's resulting in something that makes sense to them, and a more consistent tax rate estimated, I think it may be more community friendly. So I do appreciate that. Lori, any other thoughts?
No.
Knowing that everyone else has said scenario.
Well, I already said I thought scenario 2, but I do see now that it says Audit and Finance Advisory Committee, right, on scenario 1. I just am wondering about how we got to this place where we all are choosing what the Audit and Finance Committee didn't recommend. I just don't know.
Well, I think that it's,
But I don't know enough about this for that to really matter. I mean,
So I think.
Can I answer it?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
When I came on the board 6 years ago, the Audit and Finance Committee, in my opinion, because I stated it publicly many times, was a toothless tiger. It was just free pizza and people coming and yabbering, and in my opinion, it was a waste of time. I said that publicly, okay, Dan was there. And so we stood it down, okay, because we didn't think it was a real good representation of the community. And we felt that if the audit committee was going to be made up of members of the community and they were going to be making recommendations to the board, that it needed to be taken seriously. Okay, so the board, before you got on, did a lot of thought and a lot of discussion about this to re-stand up the board, but with new members, not all new members, I think you got to stay, right? And to bring in, but I'm saying, that's a compliment, is to bring in qualified people on the board, okay? And I think we have a really good audit finance committee right now, very good. And so we tasked them with reviewing the levy and what they thought and advising the board what their thoughts were. And so it is advisory, and so the board ultimately makes the decision, but that's how the whole advisory committee came up. Not just from a board member's perspective, that's what.
Elena?
Speak to that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe a little bit of our process would help you understand that. When we sat and talked at our meeting, we didn't really have a spreadsheet where we were plopping the numbers in to see how everything came out, right? We talked about the assumptions, and we talked about enrollment. We talked about the assessed values, and we figured out what those are, and we all did our homework, and we talked about it beforehand and brought in all of our data to try to figure out what we thought they were. And we came up with enrollment estimates and assessed value estimates that then Karen went back and said, all right, if we use those estimates, this is what we get, right? Because we weren't massaging those numbers as we were talking about them. We just said, all right, well, this is what we think is going to happen to enrollment, and we'd like to build in a 500 student buffer, and we think this is what's happening to assessed values. And she went back to her office and plopped it in a spreadsheet and came back and said, this is what the tax rates are if we use your assessments. And we said, we feel okay about that, right? Like, because we really we didn't put an emphasis on that tax rate. We put an emphasis on our estimates. So then Karen and Art went back and looked at the work we did on our enrollment numbers and those estimates to say, okay, what would we need, what kind of little tweaks would we need to make to those to have it to come to $1.50? And that's what you get. So I guess I'm really not, I'm not sitting here thinking, man, they're not picking mine. Like, it's fine, you know? It's really working. Like, I'm losing, oh no. That was our process, right? So, and I don't see anything in scenario 2 that is so different from the work that we did on the estimates and the assessed values that I would raise an alarm or or just say, well, if that's the way you want to go. You know, I think, does that help you?
No, that
Does
helps a
help?
lot.
Does that-
I
Thank
just-
you for
it-
that
not like
confirmation.
That's awesome.
It's not like we were plugging it in and going, all right, what happens if we do this, and what happens if we do this, and we just said this is what we think is gonna happen, give it to us, and then we kind of gave it our blessing and said we're fine, because we haven't made commitments to the community about $1.50. We thought, all right, that's good, it feels reasonable, so, I appreciate you wanting to be sensitive to that, but I don't think that scenario 2 throws out the work of the committee or dismisses it in any way.
Okay,
Does that
no,
help?
that's, yes,
All right,
that's
okay.
exactly what I was wondering.
All right, so Karen and Dr. Jarvis, I think what, I do know, the board is recommending to move forward with a 3-year educational programming and operations replacement levy and we will levy amounts that will result in a estimated flat rate of $1.50. And I guess the only call out I say is that the line 2024 will not be on.
Correct.
Because we are only doing the 3 years.
Correct.
So I believe that you have the information needed to move forward to come back with a resolution to us on November 14th. Is that correct?
I do.
The
I have one more category.
Categories.
One more item that I need discussion on. So when I brought you the levy spending plan, which is the expenditure plan that goes along with the revenues that we're going to ask for, the expenditure plan categories were listed below, and I gave you some kind of ideas of what fell within those categories. I heard that there were a lot of categories, and was there any way that we could consolidate some of those categories? And I took that back to the committee. And there was a lot of good discussion, again, about what was in each category and what they represented. And the only thing that we changed at that point was we moved the building allocations into replacement cycles. Other than that, we felt that, the committee felt that all of the other categories were relevant. They were identified as enrichment activities and allowable, and we felt that this was basically the best work that, and the best categories that we could continue with for the levy spending plan. So that's kind of where we're at. We didn't consolidate a lot. We felt that just consolidating the building allocations into replacement cycles was.
Any comments on the plan categories and the combination of replacement cycles with building allocations?
Of course. And I listened to the conversations with the committee, and it was very thoughtful. And I agree with some of the instructional programs and building allocations. We don't need to call those out. In my mind, replacement cycles, and it encompasses a lot of categories, and preventative maintenance it fall into the same category and allows some allocation between depending on the emergent needs. And then the other thing, I'm just going to say it because we may not agree, but the staffing level and professional development to me is investing in our staff. And so from my standpoint, the fewer categories we can have for the public and categories with labels that they understand and we sort of understand, that's my preference. But not to dispel the work that's been done. I really love the change to preventative maintenance. I think that's really important, so that's where I am. I would combine a few more categories.
I'm just going to make a comment on that. On the replacement cycles versus preventative routine maintenance, I like that they're separate. I think replacement cycles, you're looking at things. You're looking at tables, you're looking at devices, you're looking at, and if, you know.
We're looking at vehicles, we're
vehicles,
looking at, yes.
but things,
yes.
right? So
Yes.
I want to know that we are dedicated to spending money on painting walls and replacing carpets. And so if we put it all in replacement cycles,
we can't look to our community and say, we are painting our walls, we are, or we're dedicating that money. So I kind of like having those separate, because I think they're things versus things we're doing to our buildings that are preventative. So that would be my only.
So I would agree with her. When I was in the military, we had preventative maintenance and then we had replacement. And so preventative maintenance was in place to help make the replacement cycles last longer, so we would save money. And then I don't know if I agree with Marcia 100%, but staffing and professional development, I guess I would, for that, how would we communicate that? Because in my opinion, there's a huge difference, and I'm looking at Carol when I say this, there's a huge difference between staffing over state allocation and professional development. And I think that we need to clearly articulate that we're going to spend money for teacher development or professional development for the entire staff, not just teachers, entire staff. So staffing over the state, I think, is just so significant that we need to break out professional development for the entire staff and have that stand alone.
And
So, but I like the, you know.
Yeah, and what I would say is that the first two categories and extracurricular activities are specifically mentioned by the legislature as enrichment activities. So they do.
They are looking for those categories.
Where's Patrick? Is he still here? Oh, sorry, you're in the back hiding. Replacement cycles, add building allocations, would that category be confusing to the average voter? Is there a better way to word that it still means the same thing, but that the average voter would understand what it meant?
Since I live in that world, I don't know.
So these are replacements. So this is replacement cycles are things like we're replacing furniture and we're replacing vehicles and we're replacing stuff.
Right, I understand that, okay?
Yes,
'Cause
so I can call it we can
Yeah,
call it something
But like,
else.
are you gonna put in the voters pamphlet, add building allocations, because people are
No,
going, okay.
I'm just telling you that we took that category and we put it into
Gotcha, okay.
replacement
So-
cycles. That will come out.
You're not going to see building allocations
Right,
as a
right,
separate call out.
That's why I asked if that's gonna be in, or that's gonna be confusing.
And we can just,
Yeah.
and we could move replacement cycles under instructional programs.
Replacement cycles or
We could.
building allocations?
No, that's just
Replacement
for our,
cycles.
that's just for our knowledge.
So,
Or we could call it something else.
well, no, to state the obvious, but could it not just be called like replacement equipment or some other, that's the only word I can think of right now, some other word that, or
We
is
can
there
do
some
that.
kind of technical
Yeah.
reason it has to be called cycles? Because I don't think to a lot of voters that really means anything.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
good.
just me. I'll speak for myself.
It's just gotta be
Well,
layman's
doesn't mean
terms.
anything,
No,
much,
that's
you know.
What we can do is, we can call it, we can figure out a name for it. And when we put that factual information out to the public, we can identify, such as furniture, such
Right,
as.
which I love what
vehicles.
you did, like
Yes.
this right here, I think is awesome, because even though it
That's more of
seems,
the categories.
Yeah.
That will, because we're gonna have to define what staffing is over state allocations. It's not just teachers, it's your classified staff, it's bus drivers, it's any of those
Special ed.
additional support
Yeah.
people, so.
I'll get to you, Leslie. I just have one more question, quick. So, all of these things that we're funding are in the current levy plan, correct? So we're not
Yes.
adding anything new. We're not taking away anything. We're not having to cut. It's a leaner budget. I understand that. Where is this information why do we have to clarify these categories? Where is it put to the voter? Is it it's not in the resolution.
No, it's not in the resolution. When we have future levy spending plans, we bring that to you each year when we adopt our budget, how we're going to spend our levy dollars. So it's an expenditure plan. We also have to submit an expenditure plan to OSPI now. So based on the numbers that we're going to ask for, we have to submit a plan of how we're going to spend those dollars.
So regardless of what we name it, we're still spending on the same way.
Correct,
So we're just figuring out how to
Make it more
name it correctly?
correct.
user-friendly.
Less confusing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just think it's always, when you write, you always want to write your, at the 8th grade level, because not everybody reads at a master's degree level. And I think for the average voter, to be able to make this as simple as possible for them to understand, I just think we need to make sure the categories
Our
are.
expenditure plan in the past has been based on board goals. So keep in mind that I don't know that that resonated with everyone either, because there was a lot of detail within those goals. So now we've created more categories of some of those, what was within those board goals. So it's just a semantics.
Right, exactly. But
Change.
semantics matter.
We can come up with those names.
Okay. Leslie?
So where will these be appearing? The levy spending plan categories are gonna be in the report that we send to OSPI.
Correct.
Correct. And so we're funding the same things. We're just simplifying it to make it easier. But what it funds is gonna remain the same. So this really is just about semantics.
It is.
So if we're defining it elsewhere and we know what we're funding is the same, I'm fine. I don't think
Kinda where I was going with
because
that.
I think the clarity piece is what everyone else is talking about, is how do you then communicate it to the public? And that's a separate
Yes.
conversation than
Yes.
the levy spending plan categories in this conversation.
Yep.
So as far as I'm concerned, as long as, and you gave us the detail in here, we're funding the same things, we're just clarifying the language for OSPI, I'm good.
Yeah. And we can work with Amy
Right,
Gordon
of
on
course.
what those categories, what's within those categories, because that's what's gonna resonate with
Right,
factual
and then it'll
information.
reflect in the budget as well,
Yep.
what we're gonna be, the subcategories of what
Yes.
we're spending money on. And OSPI knows what replacement cycles mean, right?
Yes.
Okay, so is everyone fine with those categories, calling out the building allocations being put within the replacement category? Marcia, you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay.
I think it's too many categories, I'll just say that again, but yes, I'm ready to go.
We
Okay.
can keep working on it.
All right.
It's not
Perfect.
hard and fast.
So with that, I think that you have.
We're pretty much done.
Okay.
I have enough direction, I can finalize things. The next steps will be that we take our levy spending plan, we have to report that to OSPI, for approval, and they've basically taken 2 to 3 days in response. So it should be a quick turnaround. We'll also contact bond counsel and we'll get them preparing the levy resolution that we would like to bring to you on the November 14th board meeting.
I just want to say again, thanks for all the work you guys
Yes,
did.
that's
It's
a
really
lot of
good.
work.
Yes. Karen, it sounds like the title is being approved by for other districts, so I'm assuming ours is gonna be approved without having the enrichment in there. At what point in the process would we know if that was different?
When we turn our ballot title in, it is reviewed. If the county auditor wasn't accepting that in the future, they would notify us.
Okay, so I guess if they are asking us to put that back in there, I would wanna reconvene the board prior to putting a resolution, because I'd wanna have more discussion on that title then.
You would know on the 14th,
Yes,
because that's when you'll actually take action on the resolution.
right.
But you may know before.
So we would-
that you
But
could
if we
tell
know
us.
before, we could potentially
Yes, we
have.
could tell you
Yeah.
Yeah,
that they
I would
will not
appreciate it.
approve this without, and
Okay.
then you would know that.
Okay. Thank you both very much. With that, I'm gonna move, I was just thinking, this meeting's going longer, so I understand students, if there's tests, whatever you need to get to, please feel free to dismiss yourselves. And do you want to continue on without a break, or do you? Yeah, you want to, that's what I was gonna say, if we can take a break. All right, it is 8:24, we're gonna reconvene at 8:30, in 6 minutes.
That's funny.
Sorry, it's a long meeting.
Lead us through a discussion about the supplemental tech levy that was introduced to us at the last board meeting.
I could probably generate bets on my next statement, but I believe we can do this rather quickly. Last meeting, I spent some time talking to the board about a concept, and the concept was that the levy, as we talked about our replacement, is A, smaller, B, less flexible, and C, our needs have increased, just by, for example, opening 2 new schools and those costs. So the case I tried to put in front of you was that the levy lid is ironclad, it cannot be extended. In spite of what you did in scenario 1 and scenario 2, if the levy lid is less, that's the amount that you will get, and you can't estimate it to increase. So my proposal to you was to consider whether or not you wanted to do a supplemental levy. A supplemental levy that is legal. It would be a capital levy, it would be a tech levy, it could be a capital and tech levy. But to move to a tech levy, some of the things such as a telephone system that need to be done creates space within the levy that we've just put on the ballot to do some of the things that we need to do and want to do. I think I put that in front of you, and doesn't need a, I mean, you can certainly have all the conversation you want, but I suspect the real issue is knowing that we're running a replacement levy. A, do we at all want to consider it, say, no, we really are not interested in a supplemental levy, no matter what it's called or what amount, or B, yes, we are interested, and let's go, or C, yes, we're interested, but not now. We don't have enough information, or we don't have a plan, or we feel politically it's not the right thing to do. So I would really put in front of the board the guidance to say yes, no, or not yes, but not now. If you said yes, it's the one scenario that I would say, then I would suggest we need at least an hour work session to talk about what that would, the specifics of the amount and the use. So right now, I think it's more of a question of the concept and not that, there, let me put in one piece that says the factors of, do we have a long-range plan where we on emergent needs in terms of the current bond issue, in a long-range plan, when will the next election occur, and how does this affect that in terms of a rate? There are things that would be certainly worthwhile knowing or considering, and that's part of the reason I suggest that if you said yes, let's really seriously consider this, then my suggestion would be to come back sometime between now and the 14th and have a more of a study session on what that might look like. But I think right now the main guidance I need from you is yes, no, or yes, but not now. You of course can take that anywhere you want.
Yes. Yes.
So with that, I'm going to conclude my part and
Okay.
and generate a conversation.
Okay, so does anyone have a strong feeling or thoughts that they want to get out first? David?
Since Art gave us the option of A, B, C, or D, I would strongly, for me, say D, yes, I think we need it, but not right now.
I think
Okay,
that
I'm
was
gonna-
C.
I think that was C.
Oh, C.
I didn't think it was C, and my
When he goes home and the
I
meeting
was
is over.
listening.
That's why I had a repeat 10th grade. I wasn't paying
Okay.
attention.
So, C?
Yes, we need it, but not right now.
Okay.
Yes.
Does anyone want to elaborate on those thoughts or have similar thoughts about C?
I actually am leaning towards C, and the reasoning is because I would like to see the reports that we had discussed earlier. And I think we need to have a more robust conversation about it, and I have confidence that you could probably get us through it in an hour, but I think it might take longer than that. And I don't know if you want any more than that, but that's kind of where I fall.
Okay. Lori?
I also agree, C. I think that's perfect.
I agree with C,
Option.
and actually, I think it's important to look at the reasons why not from the Audit and Finance Committee. I think the strategic plan and how we're going to implement it before we ask for the money is good.
You know,
it was identified many years ago by the Capital Facilities Planning Committee that we have lots of needs in this district, hundreds of millions of dollars of needs in this district. And I appreciate you coming to us last year with a starting point of what we're going to do. We started with the most emergent need, which was the overcrowding in the elementary. And in fact, I heard you say the other day, if we didn't have this, if we didn't have the School 10, I don't know what we would have done with students this year. We would have looked at double shifting. So that was really scary to me, to be thinking that we were that close. And I have no doubt that we have a lot of tech needs, infrastructure needs, and that we need to address those as well. For me, in addition to those tech needs, we've got many, many more. I listened to Hope talk about Peninsula High School being overcrowded. I think about the 700 kindergartners that are going to be in middle school in just a few short years. What are we going to do about that? So I look forward to what you introduced to us as well a couple of meetings ago, that 7 to 10 year capital facilities plan, and how our current bond and how any supplemental levies that we may go before our voters and ask for plays out in that overall capital facilities plan, and so that our community and our board has confidence that we are going to address all of our capital needs in a systematic way, in a very planned out and thoughtful way. So while I absolutely, completely support a supplemental levy for our tech right now, or our technology, I think in order for me to feel confident to move forward and making that ask, we need that long-term plan. So that's where I feel. So I'm a C. That's a long answer to a C, but
Just
So-
add on to that, I think we don't just need a capital, long-range capital facilities. We also need a maintenance. We also need a technology.
Well, I would say all of that's underneath that plan.
Right, well, they're usually they're three separate, and they can be, or you can put it under one, but those are the three areas that need to be addressed. In addition to that, also identifying what are the emergent needs that we think we're gonna be able to cover through the bond, and I think that would give us a nice, very nice comprehensive picture, and a good place to start, and know where to move on from, so.
So with that, I do greatly appreciate you bringing yet another idea of how to move us forward with our immense community or capital needs. I think it's something that is coming shortly down the road. I don't know when, but I appreciate it, Dr. Jarvis. So any other comments?
I echo everything
Any other
you said.
comments from you, Dr. Jarvis?
Just to the skeptics out there that didn't think I knew what I was talking about, that we could do this quickly.
No,
We
it's
did
true.
it.
Yeah, we did it.
All right.
It will come back at the same time later this year that we're doing the emergent needs, that we're doing the long-range plan, that we're doing all of the pieces that you've just talked about. And so it will come back in maybe what is a better time, and then we can do some sorting. So thank you.
So I know that there's technology levy in our EP&O, so Chris, hang in there.
I know.
We will get there, as well as with all of our other capital needs. So, okay, that was quick. We will move on. And I'm going to ask Dr. Jarvis to please explain to us the surplus property.
Again, recognizing the hour, I'll try to do these quickly. The surplus property is the result of the trade property with Penn Met. As we are considering saying this is part of the Busich site in exchange for the Gig Harbor Track and Field property that was owned by Penn Met, one of the requirements, even if it's a property swap, is that the board would act specifically on the property that we would quote-unquote sell or give away, so that it really is very public that that property is changing hands away from the school district. And that requires two things that you see on 9.1 and 9.2, a public hearing on surplus property and a declaration that it is surplus property. So in this case, the property being discussed is the Busich site. As you know, we've kept the 20 acres that are the buildable site for future use and reference. You've heard the the pieces, but the park of uses that has the dog park and the trails and the wetlands is the property that we're declaring surplus. We believe fits better in the hands of Penn Met, provided that the property we think fits best in our hands, it comes to us. So this would not take place as far as a sale or a surplus if the entire trade did not go through. You're not locking yourself into having to dispose of the property if for any reason the ultimate trade did not happen.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. And with that, I will now open the public hearing on the surplus property. This is the opportunity for any community members to comment on the surplus property, it's getting late, as presented by Dr. Jarvis. Are there any comments on the surplus property? And I ask a third time, are there any comments on the surplus property? Okay, with that, I now close the public hearing, and I move on to 9.2. And I ask, is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19-14, Declaration of Surplus Property?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It has been moved by David and seconded by Leslie to adopt Resolution 1914, Declaration of Surplus Property. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? This motion has been approved. We now will go into 9.3, which is the several resolutions regarding the D process. Dr. Jarvis, would you like to say a few words about the next few resolutions that we're going to be approving?
We have talked about this at previous meetings, so if anyone had a chance to watch us, they'll fully understand the D process. But the D process is required by the OSPI in order for a school district to participate in using state assistance for construction. The two projects that we have of the four that qualify for state assistance are Artendale and Evergreen. To again use state assistance, you go through a process that is called the D-form process. We apply at step 1 for authorization to a study and survey. Step 2 is they give us permission. Step 3, we move through. What we are now into as a D-form process are some required steps by the district in order to qualify for state assistance. You'll see repeated mention of Artendale and Evergreen as the two projects that are governed by this. We're allowed, as we work our way through each of these resolutions, to say this is our evidence that we give back to OSPI, and they give us in turn, now that you've done that required step, you have permission to move to the next step. So I'd be happy to talk to any single one of those, but I think most of them are pretty self-explanatory. Quickest example would be they want to know that we have not aggravated racial imbalance. Since both schools are on the same sites, we haven't moved a single student. We have not aggravated racial imbalance. So it doesn't take a lot of explanation, but it's still a step that the state requires. So I would just offer to you the multiple resolutions and be willing to answer questions. We will need action on each one of those independently.
Okay. So with that, is there a motion to adopt Resolution 1915, authorize signatures for Artendale Elementary addition and replacement project?
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on 1915? It has been moved by Marcia and seconded by Leslie to adopt Resolution 1915, authorize signatures for Artendale addition and replacement project. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion has been approved. Moved on to 9.4. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19-16, authorize signatures for Evergreen Elementary and addition and replacement project?
So moved.
Second.
By Lori, you moved, okay. It
I
is-
moved. Leslie moved. I should
Leslie
second.
moved, sorry. Didn't hear.
Make my voice
It's been moved by Leslie and seconded by Marcia to adopt Resolution 1916, authorize signatures for Evergreen Elementary addition and replacement project. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion has been approved. Moving on to Resolution 19-17, Racial Imbalance, Artendale Elementary Addition and Replacement Project. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by David and seconded by Marcia to adopt Resolution 19-17, Racial Imbalance, Artendale Elementary Addition and Replacement Project. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion has been approved. We will be moving 9.6 to after 9.9, so I move to 9.7. Resolution 19-19, Racial Imbalance Evergreen Elementary Addition and Replacement Project. Is there a motion to approve, or to adopt, excuse me?
I'll make the motion. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Which one? Leslie?
I'll second.
Is there a second? Lori, thank you. It's been moved by Leslie and seconded by Lori to adopt Resolution 1919, Racial Imbalance Evergreen Elementary Addition and Replacement Project. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion has been approved. Moving on to 9.8, is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19-20, Elementary Educational Specifications for Artendale Elementary?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved by David and seconded by Marcia to adopt Resolution 19-20, Elementary Educational Specifications, Artendale Elementary. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion has been approved. Section 9.9, is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19-21, Elementary Education Specifications, Evergreen Elementary?
So moved.
Also move.
I'll second.
It has been moved by Marcia and seconded by Lori to adopt Resolution 19-21, Elementary Educational Specifications, Evergreen Elementary. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion has been approved. We now move back to 9.6. This is the resolution, certification of 2020 excise property tax.
The quickest explanation would be in 2016, the voters approved the levy, which included an excess property tax levy for 2020. This certification certifies the excess taxes, and Karen would be willing to answer any and all questions. But this is for 2020, not the work that you did earlier this evening.
Just to
in case, Karen.
clarify, the resolution is 1918?
The resolution is 1918,
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
section 9.6.
A little out of order, so.
Well, I knew that, but I thought I heard something else.
Section
That you said-
9.6, that is resolution 19
got it.
dash, yeah,
Right.
18, yep. So good clarification. So,
So just to clarify, this is similar to what you did last year. Because the parameters have changed and the levy limit has changed, we are now under the calculation of a dollar amount per student, and it's last year's enrollment. When we built our budget, we estimated what we thought the 2018-19 enrollment was going to end up to be, so that we could calculate what our levy revenues would be, so that we could build our budget around that. If the enrollment comes in higher, then we would be limiting, and we don't wanna ask for that dollar amount. We wanna ask for the correct amount, because we're not going to be able to collect what the voters approved in 2016 for 2020. So what we're doing is we're actually putting it back onto the Pierce County Auditor to go ahead and do the calculation, and they will provide us the levy amount. So what we're asking you to do at this point is just go back to the voter-approved amount. And then the Pierce County Auditor will do the calculation. They'll do the $2.50 per assessed value. And they'll also do they get the certified enrollment as of August 31st, 2019. They'll multiply that by the 2570 that's been inflated by CPI, or Consumer Price Index. And they'll pick the lesser amount and they'll assess that. But this
So it's the
resolution.
Pierce County assessor, right, not the auditor?
auditor,
I just wanna make
assessor.
sure I didn't
Yes,
know about-
Yes,
Right.
yes. Whoever makes that
Right.
calculation. They'll go ahead and do the calculation, and then they automatically have to assess based on that dollar amount, whichever is lesser. This is just putting it back so that we're asking them to make that calculation.
Okay. So if we have questions, we will ask after we move forward with this. Thank you for that further explanation, however. So with that, is there a motion to adopt resolution 19-18, certification of the 2020 excise property taxes?
So moved. Happy
Is there a
to do it.
second?
I'll second.
I just want to make a technical correction of excess property and not excise. There are both. Yeah.
Did I say it wrong? Sorry.
I wouldn't point that out, but yes.
Thank you. It's excess, right?
Excess.
Excess, sorry, said it wrong. So I'm gonna say it right this time. It's been moved by David and seconded by Lori to adopt resolution 1918, certification of 2020 excess property taxes. Cheaper. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion has been approved, and thank you for pointing that out for me.
That's just one that it's technical enough. that,
Well, yeah, I appreciate that.
We're on record passing the correct tax.
Thank you. Okay, we will then move to the consent agenda. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda prior to the vote? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Lori? It's been moved by Leslie and seconded by Lori to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda has been approved. I now go into a board discussion and comments. Given that we only have one time a month, I know the meeting's long, but I would like to hear out from our board members tonight. So, Marcia, would you like to share some?
I've been on
a few
vacation, I
thoughts?
don't remember
Okay,
any.
then that's good. No.
I can't-
If there's anything that you'd like to share? We'll come back to you.
Okay.
David, anything you'd like to share?
I would just say, for me, it's, I was able to attend the Region 3 WASDA district meeting last week and learned some new things that they're bringing to the table that will help with the onboarding of school board members. And I just thought that it's going to be a really powerful tool once they have it implemented for future, current school board members across the state, but especially for new school board members to onboard them. I think it was a great presentation.
Thank you. Leslie?
I'll keep it brief because I know we're going to continue on after this, but I just wanted to comment on our student board representatives and what a great job you both are doing. I really appreciate hearing you advocate for your student body. I think that's really important. The equity work in particular, as you know, is very important to me. I'm hoping that by bringing that student voice in ways that you can impact, your peers, is a really positive thing. And I hope that this is something that the board will embrace in the future and that we can have that conversation at a study session, because I think it's just an important topic. And clearly, our students are being impacted, so I appreciate that. The other piece is that I agree with David. That regional meeting was so great, and not just because we hosted it. It was just great. That was probably one of the best. I've been to a lot of those regional meetings, and I think the content was especially good. And it's always nice to have the opportunity to network with other board directors in our region. And my final thought was actually just about when we were talking about assessments. One of the things the board probably could use a little bit of education around is the iReady assessment. Particularly if it's something that's going to be included in the SIP reports, it's good for us to know what we're looking at, how it should inform us as a board, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Excellent, thank you. Lori?
All right. First, just want to thank all of you who gave presentations tonight. There were just so much great information, and really appreciate all the time and effort that went into everybody's presentation. Just real quick, I was out of town yesterday and actually met a person who, when they found that I was from Gig Harbor, told me how excited they are about Pioneer Elementary. And they have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they just want to know more about it and wanted to hear, you know, so that is cool. Excitement is building, and so, and this person was speaking very highly of Stephanie, and so that was fun to see. I really enjoyed hearing from the community member about the Harbor Hope Center, and just I've been asked a lot about if I know what's being done about the homeless students or in the district, and so that I thought was really cool to hear, you know, what is actually happening and how we can maybe partner in that. And Fishbowl tomorrow. I'm excited. Such a fun community event. It's really fun to look forward to.
Thank you.
Yeah, the next board meeting will be interesting.
Yeah, right?
Still vacation thoughts?
No, I have a few items.
Okay.
The farm tour and the apple squeeze out on the Key Peninsula, along with the fireman's breakfast, which was on the 5th and 6th, all the school district information and the maps and pictures of Evergreen and all the rest met with so much excitement. And so, and by the way, our little buses, KP School Bus Connects, help provide transportation. So that got the school district's name out there as being supportive of that event, even though the district wasn't paying for it. And then I attended, let me see, the Candidates Forum on the 8th, and also attended the Pierce County Coalition, Transportation Coalition, on closing the awareness gap. So,
Excellent.
pretty good.
Okay, I just want to make a special mention to the PSD staff that we have lost in the past couple of weeks. My condolences, the board's condolences to those families and the PSD families, especially at Voyager and our maintenance crew. So our thoughts are with them all. And then the rest of mine are more our shout outs to our PTAs and our VPOs. They are active and doing amazing things. The trunk or treats going on at all elementary schools. We just had a great kudos to the district on the STEM night that happens out at Minter Creek Elementary, and how those types of events are really inspiring kids to go do great things in the world. And I thank the parents and the PTAs for making those happen, even up at the high schools. All of our parents, and I'm just so proud of our parent community in our schools, so thank you for that. A shout out to Dr. Jarvis, to Brooke, Patrick, Stephanie Strader, Candy, I believe her name is, Sodexo, for making that WASDA Regional Conference happen. It was beautifully done. People were very impressed with the tour and all of that, so thank you. And then one thing that Leslie and I both attended over at Gig Harbor High School, we went to a Teacher Academy observation. We watched the Teacher Academy class. They were presenting, students were presenting their thoughts on being teachers and some of the things that they face as teachers. And I thought it was interesting to watch students think about issues in the classroom as students and their perspective on that. So Rebecca Weinrich over at Gig Harbor High School is an amazing teacher, and led by Erin. The things that are happening over there are fantastic. So thank you very much for all of that. And then we've already given kudos to our Audit and Finance Committee, but that was fantastic as well. And with Fishbowl, there is Food Bowl as well. So give food to those kids, because they raise a lot of food to fill up the backpacks for kids. So any other thoughts? No? Okay, with that, the board will be holding an executive session tonight for 15 minutes with no action to follow, in order to receive and evaluate complaints in accordance with RCW 4230110-1F. The board members will be holding this executive session upstairs in room 1, and will return after the executive session. And and I will call the meeting back into order after the executive session for adjournment after that. So
It is now 9:01. I would say 9:20 we'll be back in the room. Is that correct? Okay.